A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support. I had always been the kind of person who thrived on routine. I woke up every weekday at the same time, enjoyed a cup of coffee while watching the sun rise, and headed to my job as a project manager at a small tech firm. It was steady, predictable, and frankly, comforting. But recently, I found myself on the brink of a significant change. I was about to start my paternity leave. The irony was that I had no child to take leave for. Instead, I had conjured up an elaborate story about impending fatherhood, a tale that began innocently enough but spiraled way beyond my control. You see, I wasn't exactly the confident social butterfly my colleagues believed me to be. I was a 30-something man living alone, with a life filled mostly with work and the solitude of my small apartment. I had always admired the family-oriented lives of my teammates, where evening conversations revolved around children's milestones and playful anecdotes. It seeped into my consciousness, nudging me to share a piece of my future that, while imaginative, didn't actually exist. At a recent office gathering, surrounded by the usual jovial jokes and chatter, I casually dropped the mention of my soon-to-arrive baby. What I intended as a throwaway line turned into a surge of interest and excitement as well-wishers insisted I share updates. The concerning part was that, when I felt compelled to clarify that this was real, I could have easily admitted the truth. Instead, something inside me, a mix of fear and the thrill of being part of something bigger than myself, kept me weaving lies about an unseen little one. I concocted an elaborate backstory, detailing the complex logistics that my partner and I navigated, crafting a perfect facade with every conversation. Yet, as the days passed, the weight of my deception grew unbearable, punctuated by questioning colleagues who eagerly looked forward to my impending fatherhood. Days turned into weeks, and to my horror, paternity leave became more than just a nice gesture from HR, it transformed into a looming obligation. I couldn't face the idea of returning to work after a month and having to explain the absence of a child. What if they expected baby pictures? What if they wanted to meet my partner, the co-parent whose existence I had fabricated? Panic had begun to creep in, fueled by guilt and anxiety. I spent sleepless nights picturing my colleagues' reactions when they discovered that not only was I not becoming a father, but also that I had spun this elaborate tale just to feel included in conversations. I often caught myself staring at the empty nursery I had started to imagine, filled with toys I planned to pick up during my sporadic trips to the store, never bought, never needed. The moment weighed heavily on me. I rode the bus home one evening, feeling a bitter mixture of shame and sadness. Did I really need to create this barrier between me and my colleagues? The truths of my mundane life began to gnaw at me, how I yearned to be one of them, sharing heartfelt parenting tales instead of fading into the background. And just when I thought I might crumble under the pressure of my elaborate deception, something unexpected happened. I overheard a chat at work, two colleagues discussing their own struggles with parenthood. Suddenly, there it was, the relief in knowing that they were facing their own hurdles and not living the seemingly perfect lives I had imagined. Maybe, just maybe, everyone had their battles. That idea sparked a faint glimmer of hope. I finally mustered the courage to confront my lie. The next day, I gathered my closest teammates and, with pounding heart and shaky hands, admitted the truth. I spoke openly about my outrageous tale and laid bare my insecurities. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then laughter erupted, not at my expense, but in solidarity. They shared their own moments of pretending, their struggles with feelings of inadequacy, and suddenly, I felt a weight lift. The fears I thought would alienate me had instead connected me deeper to each of them. Now, here I was on the eve of my supposed paternity leave, without a child but with something much more valuable, a newfound connection and understanding that we all have our unique stories, often woven with threads of self-doubt and longing for belonging. As I prepared to walk into this new chapter of life, I took a deep breath, relieved that, although there might not be a crib to put together, I had certain friends who would share their paths to parenthood with me, and who would support me through my next adventure, whatever that may be. Update: a few weeks after that confession, I received an unexpected surprise. One of my colleagues reached out to me, suggesting we should start a support group for those of us navigating the complexities of adulthood, parenting or not. It felt surreal, and for the first time, I was excited to step outside my routine and forge genuine connections. Helping each other through our different life challenges became a new adventure, turning my fabricated narrative into a meaningful community of shared experiences and understanding. I often reflect on that moment when I faced my truth and how it unfolded into something I never expected, a connection that not only relieved my guilt but also led me into a richer, more fulfilling chapter of life. It was a Friday evening, the kind of evening that drapes the world in a soft, hazy light as day surrenders to dusk. I sat at my kitchen table, swirling a spoon around in an almost empty mug of lukewarm coffee while lost in thought, my mind still buzzing from the recent support group meeting we'd organized. For the first time in ages, I didn't feel like I was pretending to be someone I wasn't. Instead, there was a shared authenticity in the room, a collective understanding that wrapped around me like a warm blanket. The people in that small gathering ranged from new parents overwhelmed by their responsibilities to those not yet ready to embrace the title of adult. Each person brought their own struggles, stories that intertwined in unexpected ways, making me realize no one was truly alone in their fears and uncertainties. I recalled how Janet, a single mother, had shared her battles with anxiety, and Timmy, who was still figuring out college, spoke up about the suffocating pressure to succeed. Each story was a reminder of the fragility and complexity of adulthood, and I found myself nodding along, feeling both their pain and their courage. As the weeks progressed, our group blossomed. What began as a mere flicker of understanding ignited into a vibrant community that met every Thursday evening. Laughter echoed through my living room, mixed with vulnerable confessions and supportive nods. It was heartwarming, and I relished in the sense of community we cultivated. The guilt around my fabricated narrative of impending fatherhood ebbed away, replaced by a profound realization that we were all figuring life out together, and that really, we were all a little lost. I often caught myself smiling during those evenings, and the sound of voices filled with warmth and humor became my favorite backdrop. But I was faced with a new dilemma one night as I was putting together snacks before our meeting. I received a call from my younger sister, Amanda, who had just returned home from a whirlwind trip to Europe. Her excitement was palpable through the phone, but it wasn't long before she veered into more serious territory. Amid her stories about the Eiffel Tower and canals of Venice, she mentioned how she was finally ready to settle down, to talk about the next step in her life, which obviously involves starting a family. The weight of that conversation pressed down on my chest like a heavy stone. I felt a pang of panic surge, the reality of my deception gnawed at my insides. What would she think if she ever found out that I had concocted a tale of impending fatherhood to avoid the pressures surrounding my life choices, especially now that she was ready to embrace that path? Would it all unravel? In a moment of desperation, I decided to confide in Amanda during a quiet moment, carefully weighing my words. I hoped that within my revelation, she would find the humor or lightness to soften the blow. You know, I've been on this wild journey where I've pretended to be something I didn't think I could handle, I began, and she listened intently, her laughter easing the tension in my heart. I told her how raising a child had allowed me to see my own struggles through a different lens, paving the way for connections I never thought I'd cultivate. To my surprise, Amanda found my crafted story amusing and insightful rather than shocking. "It sounds like you're navigating adulthood better than most," she chuckled, "and isn't that what we're all doing anyway? Faking it until we make it?" Her lightheartedness released the tight grasp of anxiety I had been holding on to, and we spent the rest of the evening discussing our dreams and aspirations, not anchored solely on parenthood but rather on the broader realities of life, a tapestry woven with threads of hope, uncertainty, and laughter. With Amanda's unwavering support, I felt a new sense of freedom wash over me, a relief that perhaps my little charade wasn't a shameful secret but rather just one of the many ways we discover our authentic selves through vulnerability. Reflecting on the friendships I had formed, I realized that this journey was less about the lies I had spun and more about the beautiful truths that emerged from them. As I settled into bed later that night, I considered how liberating it felt to embrace honesty not only with others but with myself. No longer would I anchor my identity in fear or pretense, instead, I would step boldly into the unknown with all its imperfections. And just like that, my life felt whole again, accepting the beauty and chaos in every chapter, connected by the threads of shared humanity. Update: it's been a few months since that conversation with Amanda. Lifelong friendships have flourished, and I've taken an active role in advocating for mental health awareness in our community, inspired by the stories shared in our group. The fear of being exposed as a fake parent is now a distant memory. The narrative I once felt burdened by has transformed into a beacon for others seeking solace in their struggles. This experience opened doors and paved paths for authenticity in my relationships. I've even started volunteering at local youth centers, hoping to share the lessons I've learned in this winding road of adulthood. As for Amanda, she's expecting. Turns out, my penchant for fabricated stories led me and my sister into a new reality, one that's filled with warmth, laughter, and genuine connection. Who knew that embracing the truth about myself could blossom into such sincerities? Life is certainly unpredictable, but I've never felt more ready to embrace it. In the months since I admitted the truth to myself and to Amanda, I've felt an overwhelming sense of purpose settle into my daily life. The support group I started has grown beyond what I originally envisioned. It's become a source of strength not just for me, but for several others who share similar stories of struggle, miscommunication, and the fear of falling short in adulthood. Each meeting feels like a gathering of old friends, people from different walks of life, yet united by a common thread of searching for authenticity in a world that sometimes feels disingenuous. We sit in a cozy circle at the community center, armed with coffee cups that warm our hands and hearts, inviting the soft glow of shared vulnerability. I've learned to listen more than I speak, letting others express their frustrations and triumphs as they navigate the chaotic waters of adult responsibilities and expectations. Amanda's pregnancy has added a delightful twist to it all. The excitement radiating from her is infectious. We often discuss nursery themes and baby names during our group, blurring the lines between support and friendship. It's as though the universe conspired to deepen my connections with those around me, threading their lives into my own, and I've found beauty in the unpredictable nature of it all. I marvel at how life was once about spinning stories and creating facades, and now it is vibrant, full of real conversations and shared laughter. We've even started planning community events, like game nights and potlucks, where each of us can bring something to share: food, tales, laughter, or simply our presence. I remember the palpable tension I felt when I first confessed my lies about impending fatherhood. It was an avalanche of fear and isolation. Yet, here I am, surrounded by people who celebrate honesty in its many forms. We all have our burdens, and together, we lift them slightly, making them easier to carry. One evening, during one of our meetings, a new member shared that they had spent years crafting a seemingly perfect life on social media, only to feel a gnawing emptiness. As she spoke, I could see her raw vulnerability spark something in the others, each person resonating with her words as if they were echoes of their own hidden truths. It struck me then that our meetings had transformed into a sanctuary where we could strip away our facades and embrace our authentic selves, imperfections and all. It was a revelation for many of us, realizing that the messiness of life is actually what makes it beautiful. Soon, I found myself reflecting on my past choices, letting go of the guilt that once anchored me. The lies I told to dodge the harshness of reality had morphed into a transformative pathway, leading me to self-discovery and clarity. I attended workshops on mindfulness, delving into journaling practices, and even explored meditation, learning how to center myself amidst life's storms. It felt surreal to wake up each day, not dreading the mundane, but eagerly anticipating the lessons each moment could present. As Amanda's due date drew nearer, we laughed and planned, aware of the whirlwind to come, but profoundly grateful for the community we had forged amidst the chaos. I often found myself thinking about how life led me here, to this extraordinary confluence of honesty, responsibility, and connection, not despite my earlier fabrications, but because of them. Each day was less about the anxiety of adulthood, and more about celebrating each small victory and communal joy. As I knelt in the nursery one afternoon, painting the walls soft pastel colors, I couldn't help but feel that life's unpredictable nature was not a hindrance, but rather a tapestry allowing us to weave our shared experiences into something greater. I looked forward to welcoming Amanda's baby into a world filled with love, laughter, and honest engagement. As the figure of a new life loomed near, I recognized that my journey was far from over. It was only the beginning of a newfound adventure, one where every unscripted moment would reveal the beauty and authenticity. And though the unexpected twists and turns would remain part of my life, I now embraced them with a heart ready for what might come next. The moment my brother Caleb handed me his phone, I felt an inexplicable chill settle in the pit of my stomach. "Could you check something for me? I think Jess might be hiding something," he said, his voice barely tinged with uncertainty. Jess had been Caleb's girlfriend for just over a year, and while I had always found her charming and intelligent, there was an underlying tension that seemed to cling to her whenever I was around. It was as if she had constructed an elaborate house of cards in her life, and I was about to be the wind that brought it all crashing down. I sat down on the couch, the familiar scent of fresh coffee and the faint sound of rain tapping against the windows creating a warm cocoon around me, but the gravity of the situation pulled my focus. I opened Caleb's messages, hoping to find some innocent indication of Jess's newfound secret instead of finding any wrongdoing. As I scrolled through conversations filled with typical banter, one unfamiliar name caught my attention. It belonged to a Casey, someone who seemed to take up an unexpected amount of Jess's time, nights spent studying together, late-night texts that were anything but casual. An uneasy feeling settled over me. The more I read, the more a picture of deceit began to form. I felt torn. Jess had always treated me kindly, had welcomed me into their shared world like a sister, yet here I was, caught in the web of someone else's potential infidelity. When Caleb's voice broke through my thoughts, asking what I found, all I could manage was a half-hearted shrug. Nothing, just some study group. But the unease lingered. Over the following days, I found myself looking at Jess through a different lens, noticing the small signs that now seemed glaring, her constant checks of her phone even when she was with Caleb, the way she smiled a little too brightly whenever someone else mentioned Casey. One rainy afternoon, I couldn't contain my curiosity any longer. When Jess called me for a casual lunch, I found the courage to broach the subject in a light-hearted way, hoping to gauge her reaction without being accusatory. "So, how's your study group with Casey going?" I asked, letting the words hang in the air. For a moment, she froze, a fleeting shadow of panic crossing her features before her smile swiftly returned, though the tightness in her eyes betrayed her. "Oh, Casey? He's just a friend from class. You know how studying can get." There it was, the slight stutter in her tone and the way she looked away. My heart sank. I had to say something, confront her lies head on, but the thought of doing so felt like stepping into a minefield. I convinced myself to keep watching, to gather more evidence for Caleb. Days turned into weeks, and the sense of dread grew heavier, my conscience pulling me in two conflicting directions, one saying to protect my brother and the other warning me to respect Jess's space, the fragile veneer of our friendship hanging by a thread. Eventually, during a family dinner, I found myself sitting across from Jess, her laughter blending into the warm melodies of my parents' bantering. It highlighted the dissonance I felt, like a sour note in an otherwise pleasant song. Caleb nudged my elbow, an innocent gesture that echoed loudly in my mind, reminding me of the precarious balance I had to maintain. The moment finally arrived when Jess excused herself from the table to take a phone call outside. My brother watched her retreating figure, a faint smile on his lips, but I couldn't match his joviality. It was time to take a stand. I turned to him, my pulse racing, and said, "Hey, Caleb, can I talk to you for a second?" I dragged him to the quiet of the hallway, the soft hum of family chatter fading into the background. "I think Jess might be lying to you," I blurted out, my words tumbling over each other, fueled by relentless guilt and desperation. His expression shifted from casual to concerned, then to pained disbelief. "What do you mean?" he whispered, the weight of my accusation hanging in the air like a storm cloud. I hesitated, wrestling with my conscience, but the evidence amassed within me finally burst forth. I recounted my findings, how Jess's demeanor shifted, the text that felt all too personal, the way she avoided the topic when prompted. Caleb's face blanched, his mouth went dry as he processed my words. I immediately saw the doubt sketched across his face, the whipsaw of emotions flashing in his eyes, from denial to anger and finally to the cold, hard truth that lay just beneath the surface. Jess returned just in time to witness the storm brewing between the two of us. The atmosphere shifted palpably, and often the truth is that you don't need a hurricane to reveal how stormy the waters are underneath. A single ripple can cause the greatest waves. When she cornered us, she could sense the tension, her smile faltering, and in that moment, I felt the breath of regret freeze in my throat. The confrontation was swift and brutal, Jess unraveling before us like a fragile thread, her words spiraling into a defensive and contradictory mess. It had taken everything in me to voice the truth, but in the end, I merely felt hollow as Caleb grappled with the aftermath of my revelation. Jess defended her actions as innocent until proven guilty, caught in a lie but refusing to completely break down. Each attempt she made to regain his trust slipped further away, like sand through her fingers. When Caleb asked her about Casey, I could see hope fading in his eyes, replaced with an aching sense of betrayal. By the end of the night, Jess packed her things in a hurried, panicked frenzy, slamming the door of our home behind her, leaving a void that felt impossible to fill with laughter and light. It struck me how quickly a story could change, how slipping revelations could reshape not just lives but the very spaces they inhabited. Weeks passed, and the echoes of that confrontation lingered. Caleb and I lived amidst the silence of grieving for what was lost, both of us tiptoeing through the wreckage of a relationship that once felt solid and true. I thought I had captured a villain in Jess, yet I found myself in an unintended duel with my own integrity and the bonds of brotherhood. Conversations with Caleb were shorter, occasionally punctuated by awkward silences that left both of us feeling raw and exposed. I began to wonder if I had overstepped, if my loyalties to my brother had come at the cost of a friendship that might have merely needed a bit of time and honesty. It was a dangerous game to play, caught between being the good sibling and the potential destroyer of dreams. Yet, as my brother began to heal, slowly piecing together his heart, I learned that sometimes the hardest truths have to emerge to clear the air, no matter how painful. Caleb found solace in time spent with friends, rebuilding his foundation and exploring new paths, while Jess became a memory too volatile to unpack right now. Months later, as winter settled in, snow blanketing our world in peace, I found myself reflecting on that chaotic time. Unexpectedly, I received a text from Jess, nothing substantial, just an apology. It carried the weight of her unburdened heart, a message of acknowledgement that seemed to hum with a quiet sincerity. I was wrong, Caleb deserves better, and I am sorry for everything. My chest tightened as I contemplated sending it to him. Would he even want to know? Would it open old wounds? In that moment, I realized that life's intertwined paths shape our journey. They twist and turn through relationships in ways we can't always foresee. Perhaps the conclusion lay in forgiveness, not just for Jess, but for me too, for flawing as we all do. With time, the shadows receded, and emotions transformed into memories, leaving us both a little more tender but a lot more resilient. Life continues to curve into unforeseen directions, but I cherish the lesson of honesty in relationships, the quiet understanding that sometimes being someone else's support means asking the hard questions, even if it feels like you're lost amidst the whispers of doubt. And that is where, stripped back to the essence of our shared humanity, we all linger, between mistakes and redemption, in the heart of being imperfectly human. As I reflect on how my journey unfolded, I can't help but recall all the little moments that led me to that fateful encounter with my brother's girlfriend. It had begun as a regular Saturday afternoon, sun-dappled and lazy, the kind where time felt infinite. I was tidying my small apartment, putting on a podcast that spiraled from true crime stories into the endless chatter of Reddit threads, a guilty pleasure I often indulged in while organizing my life. Somewhere in the background, the hosts debated a post titled "A Myth Asshole for Ruining My Brother's Relationship." The words lingered in the air, resonating with my own bubbling thoughts. You see, my brother, Evan, had been dating Mia for nearly a year. At first glance, they seemed perfect for each other, their laughter echoing through family dinners. But as the months slinked by, little discrepancies began to prick at my intuition. I'd catch Mia giving evasive answers during simple conversations. If Evan asked her something seemingly innocent, she'd quickly change the subject or brush it off with a laugh that felt too forced. My protective instincts kicked in, and the more I observed, the more my unease mounted. One evening, I invited them over for dinner, eager to get a deeper glimpse into their relationship. The three of us sat around the wooden dining table, the aromatic smell of baked chicken wafting through the room. As Evan poured glasses of wine, I caught Mia's eyes darting toward her phone like a trapped bird seeking freedom. I tried to pull her into the conversation with stories of our childhood, hoping to bring a nostalgic warmth to the air. Yet, when I mentioned the time Evan tore his favorite t-shirt at the annual family picnic, I saw her brow furrow ever so slightly, and my stomach dropped. It seemed, in that fleeting moment, she had no idea what I was talking about. Intrigued, I pressed on, casually bringing up old family tales, noticing how her smile became increasingly strained. By dessert, she seemed little more than a perfect stranger sitting at my table. The evening wore on, laughter fading into polite smiles, and as the last plate was cleared, Mia excused herself. I was left with Evan, who looked so content, unaware of the unease that had tightened around my chest. I found myself grappling with a moral quandary. Did I bring it all up and risk ruining his happiness? Or did I quietly dismiss the nagging doubts festering inside me? Days turned into weeks, and the lingering doubt settled into my routine like a heavy quilt, suffocating and uncomfortable. I couldn't shake the thought that something wasn't right. Then I stumbled upon a post from a mutual friend on social media, a photo captioned with a location that made my heart race. Mia had claimed to be out with friends that day, but the photograph clearly showed her at a local cafe with someone I didn't recognize, a man, laughing and leaning in closer than friends should. That gut instinct ignited like a wildfire. I felt I owed it to Evan to confront Mia. The next Sunday, I was thrust into the role of an unwitting detective. I invited Mia over under the guise of wanting to hang out, my heart pounding as I collected my thoughts, preparing for what would unfold. We sipped tea in casual silence until the air thickened. I casually mentioned the photograph. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly, and I could feel every nerve ending in my body come alive with tension. "Oh, that was just a friend from college," she blurted, and I saw in her demeanor what I had feared, a slip, an inflection that rang hollow. "We were just catching up." It would have been simple to drop it there, to dismiss. the sick feeling pooling in my gut, but something inside me made me push further. The moment stretched as we talked, dissecting her explanations, and with each feeble justification, her facade began to fray. I found myself caught in an emotional tempest, feeling as if I were standing on the precipice of betrayal for my brother, knowing full well that the truth I sought could lead to devastating consequences. In the end, my apprehension dissipated when Mia confessed, her voice shook, sincerity washing over her. "I didn't want to hurt Evan," she said, tears brimming. "But I felt trapped in our relationship. There's someone else, yes, I've been seeing him, and I thought if I avoided betrayal by lying, it wouldn't hurt him as much." There it was, raw and exposed. She had caught herself in the web of a lie, and the weight of it pressed hard against my chest. I now had the burden of this knowledge not only for myself but for Evan. When I eventually shared everything with him, I felt that peculiar mix of resolve and heartbreak, knowing the path forward was strewn with strife but also clarity. As he processed the news, I felt empathy anchoring me amidst the unfolding chaos. That day would mark the beginning of a slow healing for Evan, a journey filled with tears, and reassessment that eventually led to closure, but more importantly, a chance for him to reclaim his narrative. Reflecting on those events still evokes a cocktail of emotions within me: grief, anger, and ultimately, relief that truth settled in like a balm. Time would teach us lessons, and while I wrestle with the aftermath of having disrupted their lives, I hold on to one clear takeaway: love thrives on trust and honesty. Even as the shadows of uncertainty loom, I am thankful for the light that chased them away, reminding me of the importance of integrity in our ties. And poignantly, I found myself nestled within the web of imperfect humanity, each thread a testament to the resilience of our hearts. This is where I linger now, at the crossroads of relationships and honesty, learning to navigate my own role within life's beautiful, complex tapestry. As I stand at this crossroads, the days slowly unravel, each bringing its own share of contemplation and dialogue, not only with the people around me but also within the quiet corners of my mind. The initial chaos that my actions set in motion has settled into something softer, more contemplative, akin to the lingering echoes of a storm that has passed, leaving only the calm light of dusk in its wake. I find myself revisiting the conversations I had with my brother, Ethan, and Jess, the woman he was dating. She has since become a stranger, not for lack of connection but for the intricacies that emerged when the truth shattered the slightly gleaming facade we had shared. Every time I reminisce about that night, I remember the gentle hum of the ceiling fan above me, casting playful shadows on our faces as we sat around the dining table, the remnants of takeout strewn, forgotten, a faint aroma of spice lingering in the air. It was supposed to be an ordinary get-together, one of those fond reunions where laughter and teasing flew as easily and freely as the drinks. In hindsight, I understand it was those very moments that held the seeds of discontent, edged with secrets and suppressed whispers. The evening turned when I casually mentioned a conversation I had overheard a few weeks prior, settling into the comfort of familiarity. I didn't intend to spark anything dangerous, but when Jess's gaze faltered, a flicker of tension darting across her face, I recognized a vulnerability hidden beneath her polished exterior. I could feel it in my bones, something was off, as if I had stumbled onto an unseen fault line between friendship and honesty. My words became a mirror reflecting back not only her reaction but also the complexity of each of our lives that felt so simply woven together at first glance. The once warm smiles turned brittle as I sensed uncharted territory emerge, and my heart raced in response, caught in the thrall of worry and confusion. Was I the villain here? How had these simple words unleashed a storm I had barely understood? In the aftermath, Ethan's hurt echoed through the walls of our shared memories, changing their texture, creating waves that rippled through every interaction, leaving me grappling with my own lingering guilt. I had unintentionally stripped away the safety of their shared world, and for that moment, the world felt heavy with uncertainty, casting shadows that felt almost unbearably long. Yet, as time unfurled, I witnessed them begin to untangle their own narrative, seeking solace in honesty that transcended the initial hurt. Watching from a distance, I felt a shift. Ethan, brave and resilient, began to reclaim his agency, powerfully confronting the threads that had sought to bind him in silence. Jess, caught amidst the chaos, sought forgiveness and healing. Her armor had cracked, revealing vulnerabilities that she had hidden even from herself. It was beautiful, and painfully raw, to see two people who loved each other engage in this intricate dance of possibility and renewal. As for me, my perspective widened, becoming a reflective pool where I realized that love is not merely an idealistic construct but a battleground where truths and lies intertwine, a place where both light and shadow dwell. I became a witness to their vulnerability, harboring an understanding that while I had played a part in unearthing the lie that had woven through their relationship, the journey towards honesty was one they had to undertake themselves. I learned that the path to healing is never straight but often obscured by the fog of fear and hesitation, yet it held the promise of growth and restoration. Now, as I sit alone in quiet reflection, the air filled with the soft rustle of leaves outside my window, I understand the importance of navigating these murky waters. I've come to acknowledge that it is often the remnants of past mistakes that can lead us into brighter tomorrows, as we strike a delicate balance between holding on and letting go. Savoring the bittersweet experiences leads us to a deeper communion with our humanity, revealing that perhaps, in the end, we are defined not by our flaws but by our resilience in overcoming them. As I ponder this, I remind myself that even amidst uncertainty, love, raw, honest, and sometimes painful, thrives through the knowledge that we will stumble, yet in our stumbling lies the chance to rise anew. Here, nestled firmly in the fabric of our entwined lives, I find solace, realizing that the heartbeat of humanity, fraught with misunderstanding yet rich in love, will continue to guide us through the ever-evolving journey of connection. I never thought I would find myself in a position where I'd owe money to the mafia, but here I am, staring at the wall of my dimly lit apartment, feeling the weight of my decisions clawing at my throat. My life was simple enough before this mess, filled with late nights at the coffee shop where I worked, a smattering of friends who never quite grasped the depths of my anxiety, and a degree in art I never used. It all started with that rogue decision to lend some cash to my cousin, Alex, who promised he'd pay me back but instead fell further into a spiral of debts he couldn't manage. I was naive, thinking that I could trust him and would be shielded from the troubles that followed. Just a few weeks later, a couple of intimidating figures showed up at my door, their tattoos swirling with ominous tales, their expressions stern. I remember how my heart raced as I tried to follow their conversation. It was a blurring mix of threats and cold promises, all hinting that my cousin had taken a loan from them, one with terms I never wanted to know. They demanded my help to settle his debts, a fair share, they claimed, but it was more than I could ever afford, leaving me with an insurmountable weight. My anxiety turned into sheer panic as the reality of my situation sank in. Every night afterward was filled with sleepless worry as I stared at the ceiling, visions of their faces creeping into my thoughts, fueling my fears that I might be their next target if I couldn't scrape together the cash. I tried talking to Alex, but he simply shrugged off his responsibility, deep in denial as he licked his wounds and wallowed in his futile dreams of success. Friends, whenever I attempted to confide in them, would bless me with that infuriatingly sympathetic look, thinking that my plight was simply a relatable tale from the rat race of adulthood, but in reality, I was grappling with monster-like figures lurking in the corners of my reality. I spent countless nights pacing, gathering excuses for when they would come knocking again, unable to shake the feeling that I was being suffocated by the tightrope I've had to walk ever since that awful day. Days turned into weeks, and my stress began manifesting physically, headaches that wouldn't relent, that churning stomach, the way my hands trembled whenever I heard a knock at the door, and how every unfamiliar face in the grocery store made me flinch with panic. But then, there came a strange moment of clarity. I realized I couldn't live my life in fear any longer. The chaos had spiraled into a prison of my own making. That night, I took a deep breath and flipped my phone open, scrolling through my contacts until I reached one person I hadn't spoken to in months, my childhood friend Jamie. Jamie had dipped her toes into the world of freelance journalism, and while I had always admired her tenacity, I was a little ashamed for not keeping in touch. We talked for hours, and after I poured my heart out about Alex and the mafia, she listened without judgment, her voice soothing and steady. Somehow, amidst all the panic, I found strength in just sharing my burden, and Jamie agreed to help in any way she could. Together, we crafted a plan, not to pay the debts I owed, but to confront the situation with clarity. She called in favors from her contacts, learning more about the mafia's operations in our city and finding potential loopholes I could exploit to shield myself from any violent repercussions. It wasn't a foolproof plan, and it required a lot of deep breaths and late-night strategizing, but I finally felt like I was regaining control. I never did find the money to pay off those debts, nor did I plan to. Instead, I cut off any ties with Alex and contacted local authorities to report the escalating threats I had been receiving. It felt like a weight had been lifted, and I discovered strength in the vulnerability of asking for help. As I sit on my couch now, huddled in my blanket, I think about how the confrontation turned into a bittersweet closure for me, and although I'm still buried in the remnants of what my life used to be, I'm on my way to rebuilding it. No longer a pawn in someone else's mess, I finally glimpse a future not overshadowed by debt or despair. And who knows, maybe one day, I'll be able to recount this experience with laughter rather than anxiety. Update: it's been a few months since I faced those demons, and while my finances are still shaky, I've taken the plunge into freelance work myself, learning graphic design to help others express their stories as mine once were silenced. I still hear about Alex, and the troubling stories coming from our old neighborhood, but the thought of returning to that life of shame and fear makes my heart feel lighter. I'm still working through it all, one graphic at a time. As the months rolled on, I found solace in the rhythmic cadence of my new freelance life, where each keystroke and brushstroke brought me deeper into a world where creativity flourished, unfettered by the chains of past mistakes. I had made a conscious choice to leave behind the weight of my debts and the lingering shadow of that encounter with the mafia. It was as if I had finally taken off a pair of shoes that were 2 sizes too small. My small apartment morphed into an art studio, with sketches lining the walls and a cluttered desk that spoke to the fervor of my newfound passions. While the stained glass light of the setting sun streamed through my window, I was propelled by an insatiable urge to tell stories, my own stories, but also those of others who had suffered the same silencing I once endured. I reflected on the way the narrative had transformed within me, where once I felt shackled by shame, I now carried a sense of purpose, using my experiences not only to avoid the dark clutches of my past but to illuminate the paths of others. Freelancing was unpredictable, and some weeks the tenuous security of my finances tugged at my nerves, but each job brought in just enough to keep me afloat, like a small buoy in choppy waters. One particular project, a visual narrative about the struggles of an up-and-coming musician trapped under the thumb of a greedy label, struck a chord with me. As I crafted illustrations that mirrored his struggles, I recalled the tight grip of fear that once held my world in check. I couldn't help but channel some of my own anxieties into that work. It felt comforting to remember that artists often pulled from their wells of pain, transforming turmoil into something beautiful. And with each completed assignment, a thrill coursed through me, not just because of the paycheck but because I was helping someone tell their story, lifting it from the confines of silence. But still, there were days when silence became an unwelcome visitor, nudging me with memories of that life I had fled. I occasionally ran into old acquaintances from the neighborhood during errand runs, their faces painted with lingering questions that only I could read. I felt their curiosity piercing through the tentative smiles they offered. Did I ever pay off my debts? Was I still in danger of repercussions? I found myself dodging these encounters, feeling as if they were unwelcome echoes of a past I wished to bury. Despite this unease, I strategically avoided any discussions surrounding that chapter of my life, substituting small talk with a wall of careful deflection. The further I drifted from Alex, the friend who had led me to those dark shores, the more I began to understand that this new boundary was necessary. I still cared for what he once meant to me, but friendships shaped in desperation often lost their footing, particularly in the face of dire circumstances. There were days when I felt the pangs of guilt, remembering how I had distanced myself from him, yet I reminded myself that sometimes the hardest decisions are those we make for our own well-being. I had to be my own priority, and in this, I understood that self-care was essential in untying myself from the anchors of fear I had once known. Life took on a different rhythm after that. I kept to my routine of early mornings filled with coffee and quiet contemplation, where I regrouped and recharged before jumping into the whirlwind of deadlines and projects. I reached out to supportive platforms online where I could share what I had learned about graphic design, allowing me to inspire others hoping to escape from their own silent stories. Every connection felt like an act of reclamation. I soon realized that while life's challenges might not erase themselves, we hold the power to choose how we face them. And just when I thought I had built up enough distance from my intertwined past, I received a message one night, a notification that sent a chill down my spine. It was a cryptic message from a number I didn't recognize, void of any context, simply reading, "We need to talk." My heart raced and dread pooled in my stomach. Had Alex reached out? Or was there someone else looking to pull me back into that life, a reminder that I could never truly escape the consequences of my choices? In the end, I chose hope over fear, deciding to respond. I was done with the shadows of my past. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was about standing firm in the life I had built. If there was any offer or threat lurking behind that message, I would face it head on, not as the scared person I once was, but as an empowered individual who learned to express rather than suppress. With every breath, I reminded myself that I owed my life to those unyielding graphics I created, each a testament to resilience, an ode to stories that needed to be shared. If there was anything I had learned from this chapter, It's that I wouldn't let my past dictate my future. One way or another, I would write my own ending. As the months rolled by, I found myself lost in the rhythm of my new life, my mornings filled with the sound of digital brushes sweeping across my tablet, and my evenings immersed in a vibrant community of fellow creators who understood the struggles of battling inner demons. Those dark days of financial turmoil and mob connections felt like distant memories, mere shadows in the bright glow of my newfound identity. But every so often, a chill would creep into my soul, and I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the looming figures from my past return to collect what was owed. It was in those moments that I focused on the projects at hand, pouring my heart into each design as if it were my very lifeline. I attended design meetups and workshops, shared my works in progress on social media, and even started offering my services to local nonprofits, knowing how healing storytelling can be. I spoke with clients who, like me, carried burdens of their own, and through visual narratives, I could help them uncover and express their truths, much like my own. Yet, inquisitiveness sometimes took over, especially when I heard whispers about Alex, my old neighbor whose heavy footsteps and menacing glances had once suffocated me with fear. Rumors traveled through our circles like wildfire, tales of his increasingly desperate and reckless actions. It made me a bit anxious, knowing that he could still be out there. One night, after a long day of collaborating on a mural for mental health awareness, I found myself at a local cafe, fiddling with the remnants of my latte, contemplating whether I should reach out to some of my old friends. I wanted to ask, just to get some sense of the neighborhood without stepping back into the lion's den. Hesitations bubbled within me, a mix of urgency and dread, knowing that once you tread back into someone else's world, your past could pull you back in like a riptide. But ultimately, I decided to stay put, cloaked in the security of my new identity. I busied myself with deadlines, balancing aesthetics with client expectations, and reveling in the flow of creativity. Soon, my portfolio burgeoned with pieces that resonated with people far and wide, art both whimsical and sobering. However, what started as therapy gradually morphed into a burgeoning business, and as my confidence grew, so too did my ambition. I scheduled a meeting with a small gallery, eager to showcase my work, relishing the thought of presenting my stories in a public forum, where perhaps others could find healing and inspiration. The night of the gallery opening was a mosaic of excitement and anxiety. I wore a dress that felt too tight and polished my illustrations to pristine perfection. As I stood by my booth, chatting with curious onlookers about my creative process, I felt a sense of pride enveloping me. For the first time, I could see the fruits of my labor unfolding, liberating stories grasping for air in this vibrant, public space. But deep down, the familiar gnawing of insecurity persisted. What if someone recognized me as the girl who had been tangled in mafia ties? Then, just as I found solace in the supportive chatter around me, the door swung open, and my heart sank. There he stood, Alex, just as I remembered him, but sharper, with a hardness in his eyes that felt chillingly familiar. Time had transformed him, muting some of the buoyancy we'd once shared while hardening his features into something menacing. I thought about slinking away or hiding behind my easel, but instead, I stood my ground, breathing deeply, reminding myself of the evolution I'd undergone. The world fell silent as he approached me, a casual expression plastered over his face, piercing me with a penetrating gaze. I braced myself, ready to stand up to the image of fear I had once carried. "Congratulations," he said, his tone surprisingly even. "I heard you're doing well for yourself," he continued, scanning my artwork, which was now a testament to my resilience, my freedom. He seemed genuine, but I couldn't shake the weight of uncertainty. "Thanks, Alex," I replied, my voice steady, the apprehension coiling within me like a tight spring. "You too, I've heard things." I chose my words carefully, every syllable curated to extract a hint at his intentions. He shrugged, and a shadow crossed his face, the facade managing to slip ever so slightly. "Just trying to stay afloat, like anyone else," he said, an edge creeping back into his voice, hinting at bygone days where our lives were intertwined through fear. The conversation felt like a precarious dance, and I was eager to end it before the tempo shifted unfavorably. "But things are different now," I said firmly, allowing every word to hit the air like a splash of cold water. He nodded, but I could see the faintest trace of regret flicker in his eyes. "Yeah, I guess we all change. Anyway, good to see you doing well," he muttered, stepping back, a reluctant smile grazing his lips before he vanished into the crowd. The weight of that moment hung in the air long after he left, my heart racing as adrenaline surged through me. I stepped back into my booth, enveloped by the warmth of my friends and admirers, and I felt that perhaps those old stories didn't have much power over me anymore. As the night winded down, strangers offered congratulations, and I even captured a few moments in photographs, each image creating its own narrative of overcoming and resilience. Each laugh exchanged and each compliment offered was a reminder that I had taken control of my story, rewriting it one brushstroke at a time. I may have owed my past a small portion of my existence, but my future? That was entirely mine to shape. And what a beautiful work of art it had become. I never thought my birthday would cause such a stir at work, but here we are. It all started when I was chatting with one of my clients, Louise, during a routine meeting about her project. She's a lovely woman, full of energy, and somehow, amid our usual discussions about budgets and timelines, my birthday came up. I casually mentioned that it was just a week away. I thought nothing of it until I overheard Louise bringing it up to my coworkers later on. That's when I got this sinking feeling in my stomach. It was one thing to share a piece of personal information with a client, it was another to hear her reprimanding my team for not remembering my birthday. "How could you forget? It's the least you could do," she'd exclaimed, her tone laced with disbelief. I could feel my cheeks burning as I listened from the other side of the office, trying to fade into the wall as I felt the weight of each word. I mean, I like my birthday, but I also know it's not a holiday that everyone should mark on their calendars. I'm not one to seek attention or make a fuss over it, but the embarrassment was magnified when I noticed my coworkers awkwardly shifting in their seats, clearly uncomfortable. It began to snowball into something much bigger, and I couldn't shake the thought that I had triggered this because I had been too open. I considered messaging Louise to downplay her reaction, but then I worried it might just make her think I agreed with her. Either way, I knew I had inadvertently set my coworkers up for an uncomfortable situation, and now I was stuck wishing I had just kept my mouth shut. The office turned into this strange battlefield of awkward smiles and half-hearted birthday wishes, and despite my attempts to mask my feelings, I couldn't help but feel a bit resentful about the whole ordeal. Was I the asshole for sharing my birthday in the first place? Should I have anticipated that it might end up being a spectacle? As I left work that evening, I kept replaying the day in my head, questioning my choice to disclose something so simple yet loaded with social ramifications. I could hear snippets of conversations echoing in my mind, Louise's words haunting me, "You deserve better." Did I? Was it really a big deal for others to forget? I had planned to shrug it off, but now I felt like I'd sparked a drama that could have stayed dormant. Reflecting back now, I realize it was possibly just a lesson in setting boundaries. Maybe I do hold some responsibility for oversharing, but I couldn't shake the notion that others should also respect the space of personal milestones. Fast forward a few days, my coworkers did make an effort to celebrate, albeit small and awkwardly, as they surprised me with a cake during lunch. There were smiles, laughter, and an unspoken truce in the air. But even then, as I blew out the candles, I had the nagging thought of how easily a simple birthday mention could ignite such confusion and pressure. It made me wonder about how often we unintentionally make simple things complicated for ourselves and others, all while trying to connect. So, was I the asshole? Maybe a bit, but we're all learning how to navigate this tangled web of human interactions together, and perhaps that's the real gift we can give each other. The day after my birthday celebration, I came in to find the atmosphere at the office tinged with tension, like the unsettling silence before a storm. My heart sank a bit. I worried that whatever truce we had formed during the cake outing was fragile, and I hadn't fully realized how profound a small detail, my birthday, could disrupt our workplace harmony. The client, a woman named Sandra, had been with our firm for a couple of years, and though her expectations were often daunting, she had become someone I regarded with a mix of respect and caution. By late morning, just as I was settling into yet another round of emails, she called me into her corner office. With her polished, efficient demeanor, she casually mentioned how my coworkers had eviled my birthday but then proceeded to express her utter disapproval of their forgetfulness. It's honestly shocking how they didn't even acknowledge it. Everyone should celebrate those little moments, she said, shaking her head, her tone pointed and almost accusatory. Honestly, I had never thought much about how to gauge others' reactions to my birthday. I disclosed this fact in what I thought was a light-hearted manner, just casual chit-chat, but instead, it felt like I dropped a bomb on her perceptions of my coworkers. The weight of her disappointment settled heavily on my chest, and I stumbled over my words, trying to defend a bunch of well-meaning people who were, admittedly, not always attentive but were far from malicious. As I left her office, an uncomfortable swirl of emotions bubbled inside me. I wondered where negligence ended and ignorance began. Did I have a right to be upset, that they hadn't celebrated, sure, but spending my birthday celebrating with cake brought me joy, not resentment. Still, her words echoed in my mind throughout the day, creating an uneasy tension that gnawed at the back of my brain. As the week progressed, I noticed Sandra growing more agitated with my team. Small complaints escalated into dramatic statements. "I expect better," she said during one of our weekly project meetings, rubbing her temple as if the world's woes lay on her shoulders. My coworkers exchanged glances, their unease felt like a strained rope, nearly ready to snap. I found myself in a precarious position, loving my team while also recognizing Sandra's discomfort, which had blossomed into an incongruous empathy. But did I have a stake in this? Should I have kept my mouth shut about my birthday? It was as if I had unintentionally thrust myself into the role of mediator, which only amplified the urgency of the whole situation. I realized that this spiral could only worsen if my team wanted a solid working relationship with someone as pivotal as Sandra. So, out of sheer desperation, I decided it was time to bring everyone together for an honest chat. I couldn't let this disruption continue swirling without some clarity. I called a meeting, not in the conference room, but in the cozy local cafe down the street, an escape from the intense corporate atmosphere. As I spoke, voicing my feelings about the situation, there was an unexpected silence. I could see the light of recognition flicker in my coworkers' eyes. I was no longer just airing a grievance but revealing my vulnerability. They shared how they sometimes felt lost in the busyness and, admittedly, how they had forgotten dates of significance in their own lives too. It was a moment of liberation, like we were all unwrapping a big fabric blanket that had been suffocating us. Together, we acknowledged that while we didn't celebrate my birthday as we could have, it didn't define how we valued each other. The conversation deepened, evolving into an understanding that we were all learning to respect one another's feelings and acknowledge celebrations big and small. Afterward, I had a real talk with Sandra. It wasn't easy, but I decided to be upfront. I explained that while I appreciated her taking an interest in my birthday, I also saw how this had inadvertently strained relationships within my team. To my surprise, she listened. The hardened front softened just a bit. She admitted it had struck a nerve, realizing she often placed high expectations not just onto others, but on herself as well. It was a reckoning for both of us, one that we navigated into understanding rather than confrontation. And so, while my birthday had sparked something unsettling, it also unearthed an opportunity for connection. As the days turned into weeks, something shifted. There was less tension, more laughter in the office, and even hints of planned celebrations for upcoming occasions. I learned that sometimes being the catalyst for tough conversations wasn't so much about assuming a role of blame or validation but about opening a door for understanding. I felt less like I was wading through unsteady emotional waters and more like I was standing on solid ground. Reflecting on it now, maybe there was never a concrete answer to whether I was the asshole. Maybe what mattered was the fact that we all had to communicate, flawed as we might be, and through that, we grew. I think we're all figuring it out, and who knows? Perhaps the next birthday will be more about the celebration of connection than a single forgotten date. As the weeks rolled on after that birthday, I felt a subtle shift not just within myself, but in the dynamics of the office. It was as if we had collectively let out a breath we didn't even know we were holding. Conversations became easier, lighter, and I could see my coworkers making a real effort to connect beyond just the sterile exchange of emails and deadlines. We had been teetering on the edge of a delicate balance, and somehow, that cake had nudged us back into a healthier rhythm. Here's the thing, I'd always been the quiet one, dragging my feet into the background while my louder colleagues basked in the spotlight. But in this newfound openness, I found myself stepping forward more, sharing ideas during our meetings, even leading a brainstorming session one chilly Thursday morning. The sense of camaraderie grew, and for once, I didn't dread Monday mornings. It was like we were tuning up a symphony, each of us finding our notes and harmonizing together, a far cry from where we had been just the month before. Then came Tasha's email. She was one of the most ambitious project managers I'd ever met, a real firecracker. Her bright personality could light up even the dullest meeting, and maybe because I respected her so much, it stung more when I saw the subject line, "Can I ask a favor?" I braced myself as I clicked it open. She needed help preparing for a presentation, a significant pitch to our higher-ups. The kind of deal that could elevate our entire team. Despite my earlier hesitation, I felt a spark of energy flow through me with the prospect of collaborating with her. There was a boldness in saying yes that I hadn't recognized before. We spent hours piecing together our ideas, and as we worked, I shared a little more of myself, my thoughts, my fears about failing, the weight of those uncelebrated years. This is good stuff, you know? Tasha said, her eyes lighting up as she read through the bullet points I had drafted. You should be more vocal about this stuff, honestly. Don't wait for the others to notice you. I remember chuckling, feeling a warmth spread across my face. After our session, she scooted her chair closer, as if she was initiating a secret mission. Since you're, actually celebrating birthdays now, what are your thoughts about throwing a little office party next month? Her words lingered long after I left the conference room. Doubts flitted through my mind. What if it was received poorly? What if everyone forgot again? But I silenced those whispers. I wanted to embrace this new sense of connection, to lean into the unpretentious chaos of birthdays and celebrate the chaotic beauty of our imperfect human existence. So I sent out a quirky, light-hearted invitation to the team, asking them to participate in what I cheekily called my half-birthday bash because, sure, why not make it more absurd? I even set up a small wishing wall with sticky notes where everyone could leave behind little notes of encouragement or inside jokes. When the day arrived, there was laughter and genuine excitement. We all wore colorful party hats, and for a moment, none of us were focused on deadlines or corporate structures. We were just a bunch of folks sharing laughter and memories. As we all gathered around the table, I realized I wasn't solely championing the significance of birthdays for my own sake anymore. I was celebrating our efforts to connect in ways that transcended just remembering a date. The simple act of showing up for one another, of taking interest, of daring to be vulnerable amidst laughter and goofy decorations, it meant something far more poignant than I could have articulated a few months ago. I watched as my colleagues swapped stories and shared awkward moments, each little tidbit weaving us closer together. And as I blew out candles again, half a year's worth of dreams and aspirations, I knew that we had moved beyond being just coworkers. We were becoming something more like a family. So, was I the asshole for mentioning my birthday? Maybe, maybe not. In the end, I realized it was never just about that single cake or who remembered what date. It was about giving ourselves permission to be seen, to be celebrated, and to navigate the complexities of our relationships. Maybe, just maybe, the real lesson I learned wasn't about birthdays at all. It was about the richness of presence, of kindness, and allowing each other to grow, one imperfect step at a time. It started like any other weekend in my cozy apartment, sunlight streaming in through the living room window, casting soft shadows on the walls adorned with my paintings. I'd spent most of the week in my studio, experimenting with colors and textures, lost in a world of creativity that often felt like my only refuge. Art had always been my passion, and with each brushstroke, I poured my heart into every canvas, treating each piece as a personal expression of my inner landscape. My boyfriend, Henry, often remarked how he admired my talent, but I could tell there was a part of him that didn't quite understand the depths of my connection to my work. Whenever he'd come over, he'd inevitably reach for my brush or try his hand at mixing paints, thinking this would draw us closer. I appreciated his enthusiasm, but it often felt like an intrusion. One Saturday afternoon, I was preparing to start a new canvas, envisioning a vibrant sunset that fused fiery oranges with deep purples. It was the kind of piece I desperately wanted to share with the world. As I organized my paints, Henry strolled in with a new set of acrylics he'd picked up from a nearby store. "I thought we could have some fun today," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. I felt a pang of annoyance, but instead of voicing it, I smiled and suggested we hang out first, letting him have the run of my living room with his beginner's brushes. He agreed, and we spent a while chatting, munching on snacks, and throwing paint at some scrapboards I didn't mind getting ruined. But then things took a turn. After seeing me work, Henry casually, almost haphazardly, grabbed one of my larger canvases, the one I had set aside for my sunset masterpiece, and started to cover it with a vibrant green blob. My heart sank as I froze, watching him work. "No, no, no," I whispered more to myself than to him. "That's not. You can't just," but before I could articulate my frustration, he stepped back and said, "Look at that. I made something." All I could see was the destruction of my vision, the piece I had been nurturing in my mind for days, reduced to a chaotic mess of colors that didn't belong. Bitterness seeped through my resolve, and I attempted to explain how important that canvas had been to me, but he just shrugged, a smile plastered on his face, completely unaware of my growing agitation. It felt like a betrayal, and at that moment, I couldn't find the words to convey how hurt I was. The day ended on a strained note, and after he left, I hovered over the ruined canvas, tears pooling in my eyes. I didn't even want to look at it anymore, and something inside me snapped. I rolled it up and tossed it into the trash, almost feeling an odd sense of satisfaction as I did so. But relief quickly morphed into guilt. The next day, Henry asked about it, and I could see the excitement in his eyes as he recalled that moment of impromptu collaboration. I hesitated, my throat tightening as I confessed what I had done. Henry's expression turned from amusement to astonishment. "You threw it away? Why would you do that?" I wanted to scream my frustration at him, explain how he'd ruined something precious, but instead, I felt small. "Because it was mine, Henry. And it meant something to me," I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. The silence that enveloped us felt heavier than ever, and he just nodded, looking away. I expected an argument, a confrontation, but instead, we both stood in the fallout of a decision that had felt both impulsive and justified. "You didn't even care about it," he countered quietly, hurt flashing across his features, and in that moment, I realized the different ways we valued art and expression. We didn't see eye to eye, and maybe we never would. That evening, I sat alone in my studio, contemplating my actions. It wasn't just about the canvas. It was about communication, respect for one another's passions, and how quickly love could devolve into misunderstandings. I thought about the work I wanted to do, the emotions that needed to flow, and I knew I had to reach out to Henry, to explain further, to tell him how much his excitement meant but how it clashed with my creative process. As the moonlight spilled through the window, illuminating my untouched canvases, a sense of clarity washed over me. Perhaps that was the lesson in all of this, not just about art but about understanding each other as we tread through our distinct worlds. Our relationship needed open conversations, a commitment to honor each other's spaces. I texted him, asking if we could meet and talk. He replied almost instantly, saying he'd really like that. As I prepared to step into an uncertain but necessary conversation, I was left contemplating whether I was truly the a-hole in this situation, or if we were just two artists in a world that sometimes felt too confined. In the weeks that followed, we learned to navigate our differences, finding a balance between my art and his enthusiasm as we started collaborating on new projects where we could both express our creativity without stepping on one another's toes. The discarded canvas became a reminder of our journey, a testament to the struggles that could end in understanding, and in that rawness, our relationship grew stronger. Sometimes, I still wonder if I should have approached the situation differently, but maybe it was all necessary, a chapter in our story that led to deeper connections, both artistically and emotionally. As I reflect on those days, I find myself smiling at how we transformed our creative chaos into a symphony of collaboration. The discarded canvas, painted with reckless abandon and then marred by unintended destruction, eventually became more than just a victim of frustration. It morphed into a catalyst for growth. It was during one of those late nights, and we sat in our quaint little living room, filled with the smell of brush strokes and oil paint, that I realized how much we had changed. We had taken steps to infuse more understanding into our artistic practices, but more importantly, we were learning to navigate our lives together in a way that felt harmonious rather than combative. I remember the soft glow of our desk lamp casting shadows on the walls, flickering like the moments of doubt and hope that intertwined our stories. I had brought home a few canvases, each one a blank slate, eager to embrace the new chapters we were writing. We decided one evening to create a mural on the large wall in the living room, a combined testament to our growth and a reflection of our journey together. He suggested we blend abstract designs, flowing shapes that could symbolize our individual paths merging into one. The planning was half the fun, brainstorming in the late hours of the night, discussing colors, even arguing playfully about which patterns would complement the other's style. We stood shoulder to shoulder, surrounded by bursting tubes of paint and the remnants of our previous projects, as laughter filled the air with a warmth that made the room feel alive. It was in those moments I felt the cracks of our earlier misunderstandings start to heal, each stroke on our mural reflecting our innate desire to express who we were and what we had fought through, paving a road to understanding. Sure, there were still hiccups along the way, he made a few accidental spills, and I had my share of exasperated sighs, but the atmosphere remained playful and light, filled with the essence of compromise. The mural itself turned out vibrant and chaotic, with swirls of blues and greens colliding but still fitting together in a strange, beautiful way, just like us. Once completed, it became a conversation starter for our friends who came over, a visual representation of our evolution intertwined like threads in a tapestry. Even on days when I felt a shadow of doubt creeping back in, I'd look at that mural, its colors speaking unspeakable truths about our partnership, and a sense of pride would wash over me. Looking back, I see that, while the moment of throwing away the ruined canvas was driven by frustration, it was precisely what we needed to ignite not just a conversation but a whole new dialogue within our evolving relationship. It's intriguing how one little action can spiral into such immense growth, leading to a bond fortified by creativity rather than just love. Sometimes I still wonder about the piece that had been tossed away, what it could have transformed into had we taken a different route. Yet somewhere deep down, I realize that every discarded moment has its purpose, leading us to the vibrant mural on our wall, a tale of understanding that will forever remind us of the beauty found within the chaos of love and art. As the weeks melted into months, I often found myself drawn to that vibrant mural, a collage of colors swirling together in chaotic harmony. It spoke not just of our artistic journey but of our journey as a couple, reflecting every argument and every compromise we had navigated together. Each swirl represented a moment in time, a glimpse into what it meant to truly collaborate and communicate. The eventual blending of our styles created something entirely new, a unique expression that still felt like us but was also something beyond our individual selves. I'd catch myself smiling at it while washing the dishes or during evening chats on the couch, wrapped up in our shared warmth. Sometimes Jimmy would tease me about staring at our masterpiece for too long, claiming I had an obsession. I'd laugh it off, but deep down, I knew he was right. It was a part of our lives now, almost like a guardian watching over our routines. But even as we flourished, I couldn't completely shake off the shadows of that old canvas. There were nights when I would trace the outline of the mural with my fingers, feeling the layers of paint beneath my touch, and I'd remember that first piece, the potential it held and the frustration it had caused. Did I make the right call? Each time that question flitted through my mind, Jimmy would always sense my distractions. "You okay?" he'd ask, setting down his sketchbook and shifting focus onto me, his brow creased with genuine concern. His kindness washed over me like a warm tide, pulling me back from my musings, and I'd reassure him, reminding myself I had to let go of that weight. We continued to bond through our projects, but with every brushstroke we painted together, I also began to see the cracks in my own patience. I was forgiving of his exuberance, but frustration bubbled beneath the surface when he attempted to take creative liberties on my designs. It started innocently enough, a splash of unexpected color on a planned composition, but before long, he would challenge my intentions, suggesting changes that were more reflective of his style than my own, and I found that familiar tension creeping back in. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting warm orange hues across the room, I stood before our latest piece, a work we had both poured our souls into. Jimmy joyfully suggested one more addition, a bright green streak across the center, and I felt a strange pang in my chest, a warning against complacency. "Maybe we should leave it as is," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but the smile slowly faded from his face. "Why? We could make it even better. We've come this far together," he countered, enthusiasm undeterred, his eyes widening with excitement. But as he painted the bold green, I stared at the disruption, feeling my heart race, bracing against what felt like an impending clash. Memories of the ruined canvas rushed back, and rather than feeling the joy of creation, I was suffocated by the fear of losing my artistic integrity again. "It feels wrong, Jimmy," I finally croaked, forcing the words through a tightening throat. His brush froze mid-stroke, and in that silence, I could almost hear the echo of every previous misunderstanding bouncing off the walls. "What do you mean wrong? I thought we were in this together." The hurt in his voice sent a shiver through me, every word punctuated with raw emotion. I hesitated, feeling the weight of my dilemma. I could either fight for my vision or consider his perspective, pondering the fragile state of our connection. In that moment, I closed my eyes and chose vulnerability. "I'm scared, okay? I mean, look at what happened last time. I don't want to lose control like that again." The walls around my heart began to crumble, and as I opened my eyes, I found him staring back at me, the light reflecting concern on his face. "I get that," he said softly, taking a step back, "but it's not about losing control. This is collaboration, and collaboration means trust. I trust your judgment, and you have to trust mine too." Looking at him, I couldn't help but wonder how this relationship had transformed, how personal this bond had become, an intimate dance between passion and compromise. It was true, I had to let go of the past. I slowly lowered my guard, and instead of shutting him down, I proposed an idea that felt both risky and liberating. What if we painted some smaller pieces together, just as a way to test our balance? If we don't like something, we can always paint over it or let it go. He blinked at me, surprised, and a slow smile crept along his face. "I like that. A fresh start, right?" And just like that, a new dialogue brewed between us. We committed to smaller projects, immersing ourselves in trial and error rather than tangible expectations, opening ourselves to failures but celebrating the little moments of creation. As we painted, the air around us thickened with laughter, music, and a newfound understanding. The mural became a backdrop for our evolving friendship, and each smaller piece that emerged without the weight of overthinking became a splash of relief amidst our artistic memories. A couple of weeks later, as we stood before a series of colorful canvases strewn across the floor, I felt a warmth flood through me upon realizing how far we had come. The shadows of doubt hadn't vanished, but they danced around the newfound light we were cultivating. I knew this journey would continue to challenge us in unexpected ways, but with every stroke, we embraced the beautiful chaos. Even as I glanced back at the mural, I smiled at our past as much as our present. Together, we were crafting art amid the uncertainties of life and love, learning not just to cope with the unknown, but to celebrate it, a vibrant tapestry of joy and growth. And with that reflection warm in my heart, I felt hopeful about what lay ahead, both creatively and relationally. We had found a rhythm woven not just through our art but through our trust, our patience, and our growing love, inching us toward vibrant futures together. I never thought sharing a house with 3 other people would lead to such a mess of feelings and moral questions, but here we are. I, a 30-year-old graphic designer, moved in with 2 friends and 1 boyfriend who somehow became part of this tight living situation. Let's call them Sarah, Tom, and Lucas. The dynamic worked most of the time, but when Lucas started getting comfy, I felt a shift. I'd catch him lounging on the couch, flicking through channels and eating our snacks. Sure, he was with Sarah, but it was like the boundaries began to blur between friendship and just having a roommate with coupled privileges. A week ago, Lucas asked if he could borrow my car to go to a job interview he'd been prepping for. Now, usually, I wouldn't mind. I want the guy to succeed. But I'd just spent a fortune on car repairs because my last borrower didn't think a simple flat tire needed more than a can of fix-a-flat. I hesitated, feeling the familiar weight of conflict bearing down on me. Look, I can give you my bike, and it's only a couple of miles to the office, I suggested, trying to be reasonable. He laughed, like I was joking, but my frustration brewed. I didn't think it was fair to risk my car after everything I'd recently put into it. I told him no. The tension in the air was thick as he mulled over my refusal. I could see him processing, disappointment washing over his face, but I held my ground. The day of the interview came, and the moment I stepped out to grab coffee, I saw him pacing in the living room, barely able to contain his anxiety. "Can I at least use the bike?" he asked, desperation creeping into his voice. My stomach churned. I felt guilty, knowing how badly he wanted this job, but deep down, I knew I couldn't let another person risk my livelihood for a short-term solution to a long-standing worry. "I really can't, Lucas," I replied softly, and I could see the energy in the room dim. When he called me hours later to tell me he missed the interview because he couldn't get there without my car, I felt both relief and guilt. Relief that my choice to protect my property had come without troublesome consequences, at least on my end, but guilt because I could practically hear the resignation in his voice. I spent the rest of the day questioning if I was an asshole for prioritizing my car over someone else's future. Should I have been more understanding? As I sat there in a quiet house that night, I realized that life in this house wasn't going to get any clearer, and maybe that was okay. We were all in this nebulous state of budding adulthood, trying to navigate friendships, relationships, and responsibilities. A few days later, Lucas came home and announced he found another interview opportunity, this time without the expectation of using my car. I smiled for him, but it didn't erase the bittersweet taste of how our previous encounter had shaped things. There were a million small choices that made this life complicated, and sometimes, it seemed, the hardest ones were the ones nobody saw. So, maybe I wasn't the asshole. Maybe I just was someone trying to protect what little I had while hoping everyone else found their way in this messy, expectedly chaotic era of life. As the days blurred into weeks, I watched Lucas navigate the hectic world of job hunting, his determination sometimes leaving me in awe. I'd casually ask him how his applications were going while simultaneously trying to not overstep my boundaries as a roommate. He often consulting his girlfriend, Jess, about the roles he was interested in, their excitement filling the apartment whenever he'd get a call for a phone interview. I couldn't blame him, either. They were young, filled with dreams, and yet, the bitterness from our previous encounter still festered in the background of my mind. I kept replaying that day, the heated exchange, the way my resolve had crumbled as I struggled to stand my ground. Was I selfish for wanting to keep my car safe from wear and tear? For wanting to create a buffer between my possessions and the unpredictable chaos of other people's lives? I found myself wrestling with a kind of guilt that felt inexplicably heavy. It wasn't until one late afternoon, after a grueling day at work engulfed in stress, that it all boiled over again. Jess came home in tears, her mascara smudged, voice cracking as she revealed Lucas hadn't gotten the job he'd pinned all his hopes on. It echoed in the hallway, and my heart sank. I could see Jess's heart shattering, and for a moment, I felt a pang of disdain towards myself. What did I even know about other people's struggles? Day after day, I had cautiously guarded my little world, but at what cost? I was a fortress, standing firm against the emotional weathering of others, and yet, here was proof that sometimes that weather could be brutal. I offered my usual platitudes, "I'm sure something else will come up, and it's not the end of the world," while inwardly questioning if I should have been more supportive. Jess, grabbing a handful of napkins and wiping her tears, looked at me like she was inching closer to needing someone to blame. That flicker in her eyes felt unmistakable, a subtle accusation hiding behind the sorrow. I took a deep breath, letting the air fill my lungs as I tried to quell the rising tide of emotions. "I know this is hard, but Lucas gave it his all," I finally said, my heart racing as I dared to speak. Jess nodded, managing a half-hearted smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. After she had left to meet Lucas for a pep talk, I sank into the sofa, feeling the weight of my decisions again. It hit me like a freight train. I had made my choices, but it wasn't Lucas or Jess who'd pushed me into this position. I was stuck in that gray space between self-preservation and the need to support friends. Would I always feel like this? The next couple of days were filled with the gentle reminder of life moving forward, despite my tumultuous thoughts. Lucas stayed mostly quiet after his setback, and I wondered if my reluctance to share my car had carved a distance between us that felt harsh and unyielding. Would things have been different if I'd just let him borrow it? Would he have felt less like he was trying to walk a tightrope? As I wrestled with these thoughts, I finally gathered enough courage one evening. "Hey, Lucas," I said, my voice hesitant as he sat at the dining table sifting through job listings, his brows knitted in concentration. "I've been thinking about the car. If you really need it for the next interview, you can use it." He looked up, surprise mingling with gratitude on his face. "Really? Are you sure?" I nodded, both relieved and terrified, feeling an almost physical ache in my gut. "Yeah, I trust you." After a long, pregnant pause, he smiled, a genuine light sparking in his eyes again. "Thanks. I'll be careful, I promise." And just like that, with a simple act, a layer of tension lifted from the apartment. It was as if we had both taken a step forward, not just him, but me too. We had to navigate this chaotic time together, reminding ourselves that sometimes you have to release control to create space for others. I had to let go of the guilt and the fear that I was doing everything wrong. Life, I realized, was messy and unpredictable, but maybe that's what made it worth living. Moments turned to memories, and sometimes, being a little vulnerable along the way was the best way to build the connections that mattered most. I hoped that this new chapter would see us become more than just tenants sharing a roof. Perhaps we could spark a friendship that stood stronger than the steel and rubber of any car. As Lucas prepared for the interview, I hugged the thought of growth tightly, and for the first time in a while, I felt a flicker of optimism about navigating this messy era that stretched before us. A week passed, and the tension in our apartment began to dissolve like mist in the morning sun. Lucas was more upbeat, a bounce in his step that I hadn't seen before. He'd opened up about his experiences in getting to know the companies he was applying to, the kind of exciting roles he envisioned for himself, and I found myself rooting for him, hoping he would land something that truly excited him. There was an early morning when we found ourselves sharing coffee in our mismatched mugs, his chipped blue one, a gift from his mom, and my plain white one. We laughed about the terrible dinners we'd relied on during our school days, the microwavable mac and cheese that tasted like cardboard, and the countless times we learned that cooking was a science best left to someone else. "I seriously thought I'd never get through that phase without burning myself," he chuckled, leaning back in his chair as the sunlight streamed through our tiny kitchen window. And just like that, we were trading stories, our laughter bouncing off the walls where silence had lingered too long. It was refreshing, and I thought to myself, this is how you build friendships, brick by brick, shared moments by shared moments. Then the call came. I was in my room, trying to focus on laundry when Lucas burst through my door, an energy that surged through him so contagious I couldn't help but grin. "I got it," he exclaimed, holding his phone triumphantly aloft like a victory flag. My heart swelled as I registered the joy in his eyes. He was excited about starting this new chapter, and by extension, so was I. There was something undeniably uplifting about watching someone else chase their dreams. But as he filled the space around us with excitement, I felt an all too familiar wave of doubt wash over me. I wondered if I had done enough to support him. Should I have lent him my car despite my hesitations? What if he had shown me just a bit more appreciation? I was conflicted. Supporting your friends feels like a slippery slope sometimes, and I had been trying so hard to put myself first. Later that evening, I sat alone on our balcony, staring at the city lights that twinkled like stars against the velvet night sky. The scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the open door while the hum of laughter faintly echoed from inside. Lucas was celebrating with our other roommate, Maria, who had baked a cake for the occasion, chocolate, of course, his favorite. As I listened to their joyous banter, I felt a pang of loneliness creep in. The moment felt profound, a celebration of dreams met with the bittersweet taste of my own insecurities. "I'm here, you know," I murmured to the night, unsure of who I was addressing. Would saying it out loud somehow reaffirm my worth, reclaim my decision? But another part of me echoed the doubts. Would I always prioritize my needs over his? Maybe there was a balance to be found, a compromise that allowed both of us to thrive without sacrificing our own boundaries. That night, after the cake was devoured and the laughter subsided, I finally gathered the courage to open up during one of our late-night talks. "Hey, Lucas," I started carefully, "I'm really proud of you for nailing that interview. But can I be honest?" He leaned in, curious. "I still wonder about that day. I know I seemed like a jerk for not letting you use my car, and I just want you to know. It was hard for me to say no." I watched as his expression shifted from surprise to understanding. "I get it. It was a tough situation for both of us. You were looking out for yourself, and that's okay. We've all got our own battles, right?" That simple statement illuminated something vital. Self-advocacy was not only allowed but also necessary in a world where everyone tried to balance their dreams against the pressures life handed them. I smiled, a warm surge of relief washing over me. My heart felt lighter, and in that moment, the notion of friendship began to reshape. From roommates to allies, navigating an uncertain world together felt less daunting now. Maybe this chapter would take time to unfold completely, and maybe the past would echo, but beneath it all, we were learning. Not just about each other but about ourselves, about accountability, support, and the nuances of trust. It was an ongoing journey, and while I couldn't predict where it would lead us, this felt like the beginning of something beautiful. So, I took a breath, let the hope settle in, and thought maybe, just maybe, we all could find our way, one step at a time. It was one of those mundane evenings that seemed endless, marked by the soft glow of my laptop screen illuminating my small, cluttered apartment. Like many of us do these days, I found myself scrolling through social media, half paying attention to the world around me. I had recently moved back to my hometown after college, trying to settle into a routine that felt both familiar and painfully dull. I wasn't particularly in touch with my old friends anymore, but every now and then, I would receive a random friend request or notification from them, invoking fond memories and a tinge of nostalgia. That evening, however, the mundane spiraled into the unexpected as I stumbled onto something I wish I hadn't. While sifting through my usual lineup of memes and pet videos, I came across a post from Jordan, my old high school friend. He had shared a link that, out of sheer curiosity, I clicked on. That's when I was greeted with a highly explicit video, featuring none other than him. My heart jumped, I could hardly process what I was seeing. The shock wasn't just in the content itself, it was the raw surrealism of seeing someone I grew up with in such an intimate and revealing situation, a stark contrast to the goofy teenager I remembered. I felt that disorienting blend of disbelief and uncomfortable intrigue, my brain racing through the implications. How did this happen? Did he know it was out there? I spent the next few days wrapped in a haze of confusion and guilt. I often wondered whether I should reach out to Jordan, but the fear of crossing a line haunted me. What would I even say? "Hey, I found your video online?" The words felt ridiculous and invasive. I kept telling myself that maybe it was just a fluke of the internet, and that I should let it go, but every time I scrolled past his social media profiles, I felt a pang of disturbance, as if our past friendship was tainted by this unintended discovery. The thought spiraled in my mind, was he okay? Was anyone else aware of this? Was it being shared? I waded through the murky waters of my emotions. I didn't want to objectify him or reduce him to a single, damaging narrative, but I couldn't shake my anxiety about whether he was aware of what was happening behind the scenes of his online persona. After wrestling with myself for a week, I finally found the courage to send him a message, accompanied by a deep breath and the sincerity of a friend. I typed and retyped my words, carefully choosing my tone, desperate to tread lightly. "Hey, I know this might sound weird, but I came across something online and I wanted to check in with you." When he responded, it took me completely by surprise. At first, there was a simple, bemused acknowledgement of my message, but then his tone shifted. "Yeah, I guess it's out there. I thought I could trust that guy with my private videos, but turns out that wasn't the smartest decision." Reading his words, I felt a wave of empathy wash over me. There was no anger or embarrassment in his reply, just a resigned acceptance of the mishap, an acknowledgement of his choices, the nature of trust and intimacy in this digital age. It felt like a weight lifted, an opening for genuine conversation, as we ended up chatting late into the night, reminiscing about school days while skirting around the awkwardness that had initially bridged us together. With every message exchanged, I realized how important it was to extend our understanding to one another, to let each other live beyond the confines of our past selves, and come to terms with our humanity, flaws and all. As days turned into weeks, Jordan and I gradually rebuilt our friendship. He shared more about his experience, how the moment had taught him to be more careful with his choices online. I admired his resilience, how he embraced this new reality instead of hiding from it. It became clear that the incident, while unfortunate, had led to a deeper understanding of trust and vulnerability in relationships, guiding both of us into a more profound and honest connection with each other. Eventually, that unexpected thread that had linked the two of us, so fraught but necessary, loomed large, creating a bridge that carried us forward. In the end, I learned that sometimes shocking experiences can shake us into clarity, reminding us that life, with its highs and lows, is ultimately built on the connections we forge. As I closed my laptop that night, I carried with me a newfound appreciation for the intricacies of friendship, and the delicate balance between vulnerability and trust. Update: a few months later, Jordan launched a podcast where he shared his journey through self-acceptance and the complexities of personal identity in the digital age. I was honored to be one of his first guests, and that raw conversation turned into something both healing and empowering for us both. As I sat across from Jordan in that small, cozy recording studio, the walls adorned with vibrant artwork and a soft rug beneath our feet, the atmosphere was infused with a sense of purpose that transcended our initial fears. It was as if we were stepping onto a stage, but instead of an audience of strangers, we were merely two friends, each sharing pieces of ourselves we had once kept hidden. I watched as he adjusted the microphone, his brow furrowing in concentration while he recalled the uphill battle of self-acceptance. In that moment, I remembered the raw feeling that had surged within me when I stumbled upon his NSFW photos months earlier, how they had unraveled my world and spun it into a tangled web of confusion, admiration, and guilt. It had felt so surreal, and I scarcely imagined that we would come to share such a profound journey afterward. We dove deep into discussions about identity, not only his but also mine, finding solace in the confession of our experiences in a world that often felt too demanding. With each passing moment, the podcast transformed from a simple sharing of stories into a patchwork of vulnerability, where we challenged the notions of expectation and fear surrounding our identities. I spoke of my initial reaction to his photos, of feeling conflicted between admiration for his confidence and a strange betrayal of our friendship, and how I grappled with the realization that vulnerability could be a bridge rather than a divide. Jordan listened intently, his eyes lighting up as I described the turmoil of wanting to reach out and support him while also grappling with my own insecurities about my perceptions. The air was thick with honesty and connection, two elements that had previously felt so far removed. By the time we wrapped up the session, the sun had begun to set, casting a warm glow through the studio window that felt like a blessing on our shared vulnerability. We spent a moment in comfortable silence, reflecting on how this had become more than just a podcast episode. It was a turning point for both of us. That night, as I drifted off to sleep, I felt a wave of contentment wash over me. I realized that those experiences we endured, the unexpected discoveries and the moments of raw honesty, had transformed us into individuals who understood the nuanced dance of connection in an often fragmented world. There was an unspoken promise that despite the myriad of uncertainties life tosses our way, we would navigate the full spectrum of emotions together. The podcast episode aired 2 weeks later, and it was shared amongst our friends and family, leading to conversations we could have only dreamed of having before. Reactions varied, some were supportive, others cautious, but the thread of understanding was woven throughout, sparking a gentle dialogue about identity and acceptance. In the coming months, our friendship deepened, evolving into a safe space where we bared our hopes and fears without reservation. It became clear that our experiences were merely the starting points. Together, we explored deeper conversations about what it meant to express love and vulnerability in friendships, touching on the fears that kept people isolated and ashamed of their authentic selves. Jordan received messages from intrigued listeners who found strength in his story and our conversation, and I would sometimes smile at how far we had come from that initial moment of discomfort and confusion. Not long after, I decided to create a blog inspired by our discussions, focusing on mental well-being and the beauty of genuine connections. It was cathartic, and eventually, it blossomed into a platform for others to share their truths. As I wrapped up a thoughtful post late one night, reflecting on the delicate balance of trust and vulnerability, I glanced over at my notification feed to discover a message from one of my readers. It was a heartfelt letter from someone who identified with the struggles of acceptance and the fear of being judged, who thanked me for sharing my story. In that moment, I felt a comforting realization settle in. Our lives are often a mosaic crafted from our connections, our fears, our stories, and the way we choose to understand them. And as these exchanges trickled down the corridors of time, I felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing we were building something beyond ourselves, creating waves of understanding and acceptance for anyone who dared to share their journey. In the weeks that followed that moment, I found myself enveloped in an unforeseen sense of purpose. Writing was a refuge, a way to untangle the complexities of my thoughts while forging connections in a broader world. The glowing screen of my laptop became a portal not just for sharing my own experiences, but for inviting others into a dialogue. I began to receive letters not only from those grappling with their own identity but from a diverse tapestry of voices, friends, family, and even strangers, all reaching out in vulnerability. Each note was a thread weaving together a larger narrative of shared humanity, and with every message, I felt the weight of my previous fears begin to lift, like a fog that dissipates under warm sunlight. As Jordan's podcast gained traction, our conversations drew in an audience hungry for authenticity. He had a talent for cultivating a space where stories flowed freely, and I watched as people opened up about their own experiences, revealing the wounds they carried, the battles they fought in silence. Every episode was a reminder that we were not alone, that the threads of our lives were interconnected, even if we often felt like solitary travelers on our respective journeys. The therapeutic richness of our discussions resonated so powerfully that we considered live sessions, inviting our listeners to join in and share their stories, live and unfiltered. One evening, after a particularly moving episode, I laid on my couch, gazing at the ceiling, thoughts swirling in my mind. I remembered my own journey, the immense weight of fear I had endured when I unearthed Jordan's NSFW content. It had initially felt like a betrayal, a rupture in the fabric of our friendship. Yet, now, it appeared as merely a chapter in a broader narrative of growth, acceptance, and deeper understanding. As I turned those ideas over, I started to pen my thoughts, a reflection on how fear can isolate us but also push us toward clarity and connection. Weeks later, after I shared my reflections in one of our episodes, a woman named Mia reached out. She was searching for solace in a tumultuous sea of self-doubt after experiencing something deeply personal, a shocking revelation from her best friend who had suffered through similar battles of identity. Mia's note was laced with pain, courage, and a hint of hope, and as I read her words, my heart swelled with empathy. I felt a calling, a collective responsibility to channel our experiences into something constructive for others, to transform our authentic exchanges into healing touchstones. Eventually, we scheduled a collaborative session where Mia could join us on air, a chance to share her story with vulnerability. The three of us chatted before recording, and I could sense Mia's hesitation. What if no one understands? She shared, the tremor in her voice betraying her fears. In a reassuring tone, I replied, "That's the beauty of sharing. Even if just one person listens and feels seen, it's worth it." With the warmth of our shared energies wrapping around us, we pressed record, and Mia shared more than I could have hoped. Her authentic vulnerability inspired a flood of comments from listeners, people sharing their own experiences of love, loss, and the rawness of existence. After that episode, our community grew exponentially. Messages poured in, and together, we navigated through backstories of fear, courage, and redemption. Each tale felt like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, slowly creating a whole that was more vibrant than I could have imagined. Through these interactions, I learned that vulnerability weaves the strongest bonds, tying hearts together in a way superficial connections never could. Months later, during a live session that felt charged with energy and authenticity, I reflected on how far we'd come. I could hear the hushed whispers of other shared stories around me, an orchestra of human experiences blending into a comforting harmony. As we concluded, a listener's message popped up, someone thankful for the community we had fostered, expressing how the space made them feel seen for the first time in years. I shared that note aloud, feeling a lump forming in my throat. My heart brimmed with gratitude, a sense of belonging rising within me. This journey began with fear but transformed into something profound, an unabashed embracing of humanity's stories. As I closed my laptop that night, I understood that life is not merely a collection of moments but rather the bonds we forge amidst them, powerful connections that flourish in the soft glow of empathy. I felt a renewed sense of purpose. We were not just sharing stories anymore, we were nurturing a sanctuary where fears could be laid bare, acceptance could blossom, and every voice, even those hidden in the shadows, could resonate with truth. It was in this space that we truly found ourselves, each other, and the collective light we were meant to share. I always thought family meant sticking together no matter what, but here I was, standing on the brink of not attending my sister's wedding, and it felt like a betrayal. My sister, Alyssa, had been planning her big day for over a year, and I could see how excited she was about every little detail. But as the date drew nearer, I learned the venue wasn't accessible. For someone who's been in a wheelchair since a car accident a decade ago, it was more than just a minor inconvenience, it felt like a punch to the gut. I vividly remember sitting in my living room, laptop on my lap, scrolling through pictures of the beautiful estate Alyssa had chosen with its sweeping staircases and narrow doorways. I couldn't help but wonder if she had ever envisioned a day when her older brother would be trapped outside, missing the one moment I knew she'd dreamed about since she could barely walk. I tried to shake off the knot tightening in my stomach, convincing myself I could find a way around it. Maybe I could watch the ceremony on video or have someone FaceTime me from the venue. But what kind of brother would I be if I chose to observe from a distance? That thought gnawed at me, pulling at the very fabric of my identity. I wrestled with an internal conflict, feeling a whirlwind of emotions, anger towards my sister for not ensuring the venue was accessible, guilt for even considering not going, and bitterness towards my circumstances, as if they were dragging me into a corner away from being part of the family. I finally picked up my phone, my heart racing as I dialed her number. When she answered, there was a brightness in her voice that made my heart ache. "I can't wait for you to see everything, it's going to be perfect," she exclaimed, and I could almost picture her twirling around in excitement. About that, I stumbled, my voice thick, and I felt a wave of nausea crash over me as I explained the accessibility issues. There was a loaded silence on the other end before Alyssa's tone shifted. I didn't think to check. "I'm so sorry, I thought it would work," she said, and I could tell she was genuinely upset. I didn't want her day ruined or for her to feel guilty when she shouldn't. "You should still go," I found myself insisting, my throat tight. I just don't know if I can be there and not actually be there, you know?" I hung up feeling like I'd just dropped an emotional bomb. The days ticked by, and the wedding loomed like a shadow over me. I could picture her in her stunning gown, surrounded by smiling friends and family, while I would be left questioning my place in it all. A week before the wedding, Alyssa called again, her voice more subdued. "Is there any way you can come? I've been looking into portable ramps and maybe we can figure this out." As sweet as her intentions were, the thought of making her scramble at the last minute felt like yet another weight on her shoulders. "You know what? I think it's okay if you and I just FaceTime," I suggested weakly, my heart breaking at disconnecting us in such a pivotal moment. "I love you, Alyssa, but I don't want to be a distraction." The day of the wedding, I dressed up and sat in front of my laptop, fighting back tears as the first chords of the wedding march filled my living room. I could almost feel the warmth of the sun streaming through the trees at the venue and hear the cheers of family members rejoicing. Alyssa looked beautiful, glowing in her gown, but as I raised my hand to wave hello, my heart felt heavier than it ever had. After the ceremony, as I watched my sister laugh and dance, a small part of me felt anger bubbling to the surface, anger at the world for shutting me out, and a bigger part, a sort of bittersweet acceptance, knowing that this was my reality. I realized that distancing myself from the family wasn't the answer, no matter how much it stung. Sure, Alyssa hadn't thought through the accessibility, but she loved me, and that love didn't hinge on the staircases I couldn't climb. As I shut my laptop after the final toast, I felt a mixture of regret and relief. I hadn't been there in person, but in some way, our bond remained intact. Months later, she and I would go to lunch, and in between bites of sweet potato fries, she slipped a note across the table, an invitation to help choose the venue for her renewal of vows in a few years. "I promise it'll be accessible, this time," she winked. And just like that, through all the twists and turns, I found a glimmer of hope that we could advance together, step by step, no matter the distance life put between us. As I sat across from her, the smell of garlic aioli mingling with the warm spring air, I realized how much I had missed moments like this, just the two of us laughing and reminiscing. The sweet potato fries felt like a bridge over the gap that had grown during our years of silence. My sister had always been the one with boundless energy, pulling me along on adventures I never asked for but ended up loving. I remembered all the times I had wheeled alongside her through bustling city streets and quiet parks, her laughter echoing in my ears while my wheelchair was simply a part of the scenery. But then came the wedding, a day that should have been filled with joy, turned into a painful reminder of our differences and the rift that widened with each turn of the planning while she embarked upon without considering my needs. It hadn't been just a physical divide, it had felt like an emotional chasm, one that I feared might never be bridged. When she slipped that note across the table, my heart did a little skip, but I also felt the weight of uncertainty. Could we truly move forward? I stared at the invitation, the elegant script of her handwriting unspooling memories of our childhood, twilight backyard adventures, late-night conversations, and the little secrets we whispered as we tucked ourselves into bed, feeling invincible. I chuckled softly at the graphics she'd sketched. In the margins, twisting shapes of flowers and stars that looked more like a childhood doodle than a wedding concept. So where do we start? I finally asked, my voice betraying the mix of excitement and caution churning inside me. She squeezed her brown eyes in that way she did when she was gleeful, a sign that we were on the same page again. How about the beach? I've always wanted to say I do with the waves crashing behind me. As the conversation flowed, the ideas poured out like a refreshing tide, bringing warmth and a sense of renewal I hadn't realized I was longing for. We drew sketches on napkins, imagined colors that would drip down the canvas of our memories. The sun illuminated our laughter, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I could feel the spark of our bond rekindling. Yet, the doubt lingered in the back of my mind, a quiet reminder that we still had hurdles to overcome. Months passed as we wove through planning meetings, and as my sister pursued her dream, I cheered her on, yet my heart was a mixture of elation and lingering anxiety. How would she react when the spotlight shifted to the accessibility concerns again? Would we be able to mesh our visions, the grandeur of her dream wedding with the stark reality of my needs? I can't help but think of how the last few years had unfolded. The push and pull of our lives seemed like an intricate dance, one where we stepped in and out of sync. Then, the day finally arrived for the venue tour, and the stakes felt immeasurable. With each step closer to the location, my heart raced, anticipation wrapping around me like a comforter. This was a chance for us, not just for her, but for us as sisters. We pulled up to the beach venue, the soft sound of waves greeting us. She hopped out excitedly, taking in the scenery, and my heart tightened with a mixture of hope and dread. "What do you think?" she called back, her voice cutting through the salty breeze. I looked at the row of steps leading to the beautiful sandy stretch, and a lump formed in my throat. "It has to be accessible," I replied, my voice shaky as I formulated the words. There was a pause, then she turned back, her expression transforming from joy to concern. The realization hung between us, a flimsy thread ready to snap. "I didn't even think about that," she admitted softly. I felt a wave of frustration crash over me, but there was something in the way she looked at me, regret mixed with determination. "Let's make sure that it is," I said, grounding her back into the conversation. "What matters is that we celebrate your love, and no one should have to limit themselves based on perceived barriers." As we spent the afternoon discussing every detail from ramps to seating arrangements, I could feel that earlier tension melting away. She listened, genuinely wanting my input, and by the end of it, there was a sense of unity, a reaffirmation that we were partners in this journey. And as I wheeled down the ramp they reluctantly agreed to install, gentle sunlight spilling over us, I couldn't help but feel that we were building something reliable. A relationship that allowed for both of our anxieties and ambitions, stretching into the future like the horizon before us. We were stumbling into a new chapter, and in that moment, every step she took toward inclusivity felt as powerful as the waves crashing behind us, paving the way for us to finally come together. As we rolled away from the fluttering banners and the sound of laughter behind us, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was the end of one intense chapter and the hopeful beginning of another. The sun cast a golden glow on the pavement, and every part of me ached to believe that we had finally moved past the doubts and strange tensions that had once defined our relationship. Our lunch promise, nestled between bites of sweet potato fries, felt like a pact, a blend of growth and understanding that I hadn't been sure we'd ever reach. We spent those early days after the wedding navigating each other's perspectives, developing a rhythm that suited both of us. Sarah, ever the planner, wanted to ensure that what had once felt limiting now blossomed into opportunities. I'd go through design magazines stacked on her coffee table, filling the spaces with doodles of accessible moments, visualizations of love and laughter shared across barrier-free tables. Choosing hues and fabrics that spoke to our personalities became a habit we cherished. I'd watch her eyes light up whenever she pitched new ideas, and each time my heart swelled more than the last. One evening, while we sat on her porch adorned with string lights, I shared my fears about everything that had transpired, the doubts that still occasionally crept into my knotted stomach. What if this is just a moment? I asked, nervousness inching into my voice. What if we fall back into old patterns? She laid her hand across mine, and warmth surged through me as she searched my eyes. It's just the beginning. We're wiser now, right? We won't ignore our differences, we'll embrace them. It struck me how easily she spun my concerns into threads of commitment, weaving our different experiences into something sturdy. Months rolled on, and those gatherings became pivotal. Each event we attended, every meeting with friends, felt like practice. I learned where the gaps in conversations widened and where certain remarks stuck, and Sarah mirrored my growth with palpable enthusiasm. It was strangely exhilarating, a slow dance of vulnerability and strength. We'd share a laugh or a sidelong glance while standing in a circle of friends, our unspoken connection creating everything from an inside joke to the safety of conversation. After a year of navigating through life together, Sarah proposed we host a weekend retreat for family and friends, another venue on the horizon. This time, she meticulously scouted accessible cabins in the hills, poring over pictures and reviews. I argued that they felt too rustic, but she shrugged it off with that charm I'd come to adore. It's about creating memories, not fitting a mold. We can have fun anywhere. As the retreat weekend approached, I felt those familiar jitters rise. What if things unraveled? What if the old resentments resurfaced? But as friends streamed into the cozy cabin and laughter overshadowed my worries, I felt the sweetness of our hard work settle around us like a hug. Sarah didn't flinch when someone knocked their drink, spilling it across the floor. She smiled, pulled me closer, and called for towels. We adapt. In those little moments, I recognized just how much we had evolved, no longer sidestepping anything difficult. We faced it head on, laughing about mishaps, sharing stories late into the night. As everyone gathered around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing ghost stories, I leaned back, soothed by the crackling flames. The weathered cabin surrounded us felt strong, just like our bond. There was something beautifully imperfect about building our new reality together, one where glances spoke volumes and where every shared experience was a step forward, however small. I could feel the roots of our relationship deepening, intertwining, much like the intertwining branches of the trees around us, and with it came a promise that neither of us would ever stop trying to understand. When Sarah caught my eye and raised her marshmallow-coated stick, I realized that this was more than a moment, it was a commitment, a radiant journey forged through respect and love. It wasn't just about getting things right, it was about creating the space to be wrong, to grow, and together, soar against any odds. I squeezed her hand, my heart whispering words of gratitude, knowing that our story was still unfolding beautifully, in ways neither of us could predict. It all began with a simple email that landed in my inbox on a dreary Wednesday morning. The subject line read payroll, important update, and in a moment of both dread and curiosity, I clicked it open. You see, I've never been the kind of person to make a fuss. I work quietly as an accounting clerk in a mid-size firm, diligently toiling away for a paycheck that barely helped me keep my head above water. I'm a 28-year-old woman navigating the world with a tinge of anxiety and a lifelong struggle to pay bills on time, all while wrestling with the looming shadow of student loans that felt more like a hungry beast than an obligation. The email explained that they were implementing a new payroll system, and while I barely glanced at the details, I noticed a mention of bonus adjustments and temporary increases which piqued my interest. I hadn't thought much of it until the following Friday when my paycheck arrived, and reality hit me like a tidal wave. My eyes skimmed over the digits displayed in my online banking app until they came to a complete stop, staring in disbelief. I was overpaid, by a lot. The total was 5 times my usual paycheck, and a wave of excitement washed over me so instantaneously that I found it hard to breathe. Was it a mistake? A windfall? I rushed to my laptop, retracing my steps through the payroll system, but everything seemed to check out. After skimming through the company's online manual on payroll adjustments, I was relieved to find that they had mentioned this would happen. However, the ramifications of keeping this money loomed over my head like an anxious cloud. For the first few days, I couldn't deter the bliss that came with being suddenly affluent. I treated myself to my favorite meals, replaced my sorely lacking wardrobe with outfits that made me feel like a new woman, and even allowed myself a weekend trip to a quaint little cabin by the lakeside where I could finally breathe away from my work. Each indulgence felt bittersweet, a thrilling escape from my grind, tempered with guilt for indulging in what felt like ill-gotten gains. As the weeks passed, I wondered how long I could keep this up. Each paycheck became a new thrill in the world of possibilities. I cleaned my apartment, nurtured plants that previously hung on the brink of life, and took my friends out for drinks that ended with uproarious laughter echoing against the bar walls, their expressions of glee making every decision feel justified. But clouds of dread hovered closely nearby. Thoughts of consequence gnawed at my insides during the quiet moments at night, where I lay restless, the weight of the secret driving a wedge between my high spirits and reality. I convinced myself I had no choice but to keep the facade, that it was too risky to report the glitch. After all, I had never even stepped foot into the town hall of corporate policy. I was there to do my job, not to interpret the rules. All it would take was one slip, one whispered word about my newfound fortune, and I could find myself not only out of a job but embroiled in a terrible situation that I wasn't prepared to navigate. Months passed, I found myself submerged in this intricate web of deceit, mingling pleasure with a hefty splash of paranoia. The anxiety thickened each time payroll day came around, and the thought lingered, gnawing at my thoughts like a mouse in the night. I could feel the ultimatum building, bringing the reality crashing down until one afternoon while sitting at my desk, I was blindsided by an urgent email marked important notice which sent my heart racing. It was a request from HR, calling a company-wide meeting to discuss payroll discrepancies. The words swirled around in my mind like confetti thrown into the air before crashing to the ground as a harsh truth settled in. They knew. They must have confirmed the miscalculations, ran their audits, and deduced I was likely involved. My stomach churned, and I felt the icy grip of despair tighten around my chest. The realization hit me hard. I had grown so used to my false safety blanket of extra funds that I couldn't even begin to imagine relinquishing them now, the very thought terrifying me into frozen paralysis. The day of the meeting arrived with a clarity that I wished I could escape. Standing in front of my colleagues, I felt like an imposter, bound by the walls of my own constructed greed. The HR manager explained the error and expressed their process for rectification, but a strange anticipation filled the room, as eyes darted back to my direction. I wrestled with my emotions, staring down at my clasped hands, feeling that if I let my tongue slip, it would only shatter the already delicate stage we stood upon. In a moment that needed no hesitation, perhaps spurred on by the weight of my debts and my guilt, I decided to come clean. I raised my hand, my voice breaking through a silence that shrouded the department. I think I might have been one of those overpaid. As the murmurs filled the room, I could sense curiosity mixed with disbelief. The HR manager nodded thoughtfully, calling me up in a tone that indicated more than just professional grace. In that instant, an invisible burden lifted off my shoulders, a relief I hadn't known I was seeking. The interview that followed was surprisingly gentle. They asked me questions, assured me things would be sorted, and even nodded when I expressed my genuine confusion about how it all happened. My honesty seemed to be met with kindness, rather than scorn. Days later, after tension smoothed out and the firm welcomed a collective sigh of temporary relief, I found myself hesitantly optimistic. The company worked with me, allowing me to pay back the overpaid balance in manageable deductions taken directly from my subsequent checks. The relief flooded my spirit like the spring rains after a long winter, and in tandem with the trust I'd gained back with my coworkers, I felt grounded. As a quiet reflection, I'd learned a plethora of life lessons in those months, about honesty, about the currency of trust, and about genuinely valuing what I already had. And as for the meeting that had once infused dread into my veins, it turned out to be the turning point where I could not only salvage my job but craft deeper relationships within my workplace. Now, as I close my eyes at night, the weight of secret remorse has settled onto soft pillows of new beginnings, and I find that the true bounty of unexpected fortune lies not in dollars, but in the peace of being was wholly true. Looking back, it wasn't only about the glitch, it was a lesson on what happens when you find yourself standing at the crossroads of opportunity and ethical discovery. If I had a chance to offer anyone a piece of advice, it would be this: sometimes, the hardest confessions yield the sweetest outcomes, tethered to authenticity, which, much like a deep breath, can release the most burdensome of weights. Update: a few months later, after I'd regained my balance at work and developed friends with my colleagues through concrete illusions of trust, I received an unexpected email from my HR manager. Their words acknowledged my honesty and an unanticipated promotion due in part to the integrity I displayed. Life never ceases to entertain a curveball, and this new opportunity was one that I humbly accepted, smiling at the gentle lesson wrapped inside the embrace of everyday existence. When I first read the email from my HR manager, a strange mix of disbelief and elation coursed through me. The promotion was more than just a title bump, it came with a salary increase that, while not nearly as outrageous as the one I had accidentally benefited from during that glitch, was significant enough to make my heart race with possibilities. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed out my response, gratitude spilling from my thoughts onto the screen in a flurry of acknowledgments and excitement. Yet, there was a twinge of unease nestled within my heart, a soft reminder that while I had experienced fortuitous fortune, my colleagues were still working tirelessly, unaware of the inner transitions I'd undergone. When I walked into the office that Monday morning, my usual routine was invigorated by the prospect of my new responsibilities. The air felt charged, almost electric, but with every friendly smile exchanged and casual conversation I engaged in, I couldn't shake the feeling that I owed my team a deeper layer of transparency. The last few months had shaped me tremendously. Honest conversations about ethics and accountability had sparked friendships among my peers. I found myself reveling in camaraderie and shared laughter, the kind that stitched together hearts and minds in a workplace filled with mundane tasks and the occasional coffee break chatter. Yet somewhere in the back of my mind, guilt lingered like a shadow. Could I truly relish this achievement, knowing how it grew from a moment of chaos and moral ambiguity? As the morning faded, I huddled in a conference room for our monthly team meeting, where I listened to my colleagues discuss their struggles, their victories, and everything in between. Their drive inspired me, and as my new role would place me in a position to support them more directly, I felt the need to share my journey, the good, the bad, and the ugly, with the team. At the end of the meeting, as the group wrapped up with a round of thanks and recognition, I cleared my throat, the hesitant silence punctuated by the shifting in chairs. "Hey, everyone," I began, voice slightly wavering. "Before we leave, I wanted to share something with you all. It seems a bit weird maybe, but I think you deserve to know a part of my journey here." The room turned attentive, curiosity swirling in their eyes, and I began to recount my experience with the payroll glitch, the guilt, my honesty, and how it led to my unexpected promotion. I explored my emotions, the fears of judgment battling with my desire to connect and be truthful. When I finished, the room fell silent for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity, but then, one by one, I saw smiles and nods bloom among my colleagues. "Wow, that's brave of you to share," one of them said, their voice warm and inviting. "We appreciate the transparency. It's refreshing." Another chimed in, and soon voices were mingling in a tapestry of support, stories shared, and laughter at the absurdity of life's twists. Through that candid moment, I felt the weight of my earlier guilt lifted, replaced by a profound connection that tethered us together in the shared unpredictability of our paths. The weeks that followed were punctuated by collaborative projects and an exhilarating sense of unity. I became dedicated not only to performing my new duties well but also to creating an environment where honesty was celebrated and shared burdens were lightened. The team flourished, nurturing creativity and innovation. I could finally say I didn't just have a job, I had a family, a tapestry of stories woven together by trust. Reflecting on that period, I savored lessons stitched into my daily actions and interactions around the water cooler gossip and shared lunches. Life truly is a series of beautiful confessions leading to unexpected gifts. Just when I thought I'd hit my peak, I learned the true value is in the relationships we cultivate, tinted with authenticity, humility, and a sense of humor that helps us navigate the bizarre realities that life throws our way. And as I go to bed tonight, I feel a peace knowing that each day is a chance to weave new stories into the fabric of our collective experience, curving gracefully into the unknown. Perhaps that's what life is all about, embracing the glitches, the flaws, and the moments where honesty truly becomes our currency, a continued lasting lesson echoing softly in the chambers of my heart. As I settled into bed that night, the weight of the past few months drifted like autumn leaves, gentle reminders of growth and change. The promotion had been more than an unexpected turn in my career, it seeped into the crevices of my day-to-day life, cultivating a deeper appreciation for my colleagues and the shared spaces we inhabited. I began nurturing friendships that felt like fresh blooms in the garden of my existence, moments filled with laughter over lunch breaks and genuine conversations that spilled into after-work gatherings. I recalled one chilly evening just a few weeks after receiving the promotion, when my coworkers and I gathered at a local bar, the air thick with the scent of spiced cider and the chatter of laughter. We traded stories about insignificant mishaps that turned into hilariously exaggerated tales, like the time I attempted to fix the office printer, only to battle it for what felt like hours, ultimately throwing in the towel to let my supervisor handle it. It was then that I fully realized the important distinction between taking oneself too seriously and weaving humor into the fabric of our everyday struggles. As these friendships blossomed, an unforeseen layer of responsibility accompanied my new role, demanding diligence and a commitment to accountability that at times felt daunting. I was tasked with leading our weekly meetings, bringing new ideas to the table while simultaneously keeping the energy uplifting. On one particularly rainy Thursday, I stood before my colleagues, a mix of nerves and excitement swirling within me. As I delved into the agenda, I noticed one of my new friends, Sarah, leaned back in her chair with this mischievous grin. In that moment, I took a breath, recalling the previous turmoil I'd endured, and slipped into the comfort of authenticity that had served me well in the past. I turned the meeting into a collage of brainstorming, encouraging everyone to toss wild imaginaries into the bowl, and with every idea tossed about, it felt as if we weren't just colleagues anymore, we were a chorus, blending our distinct harmonies into a melody of creativity. However, not long after, an interesting dilemma nudged at the corners of my happiness. Rumors swirled through the office about impending layoffs that left many in a cloud of anxiety. It was gut-wrenching to watch as stress drained the light from our vibrant discussions, replacing it with somber whispers. I couldn't ignore the creeping sense of dread that accompanied these conversations, and soon found myself in the break room, cooking up an idea to diffuse the tension. With a heart full of hope, I organized a day of gratitude, inviting everyone to share things they appreciated about their roles, whether it was the comfort of our shared coffee mugs, a favorite project, or even an early Friday wrap-up, the simplest joys that framed our work life. That day unfolded like a soft unfurling cocoon, as laughter replaced anxiety. As the room filled with genuine appreciation for one another, I felt the intertwining threads of community tighten around us, forming an unyielding bond against the uncertainty that loomed outside. In this peculiar patchwork of existence, I also confronted the inevitable feeling of vulnerability that lay in expressing gratitude. I learned just how important it was to acknowledge our fears and challenges, but alongside them, the shimmering possibilities that friendship and camaraderie could nurture. Reflecting on this experience as I settled back into bed that night, a glimmer of realization poked through my usual snuggles of comfort. Life, in its erratic brilliance, had brought about transformations not just in my career, but in the heart of who I was becoming. I smiled at the echoing lesson. Embracing uncertainty became far easier when shared with a circle of laughter and warmth. And as the time dripped away into the stillness of the night, I understood that the essence of my journey hinged on this idea: by owning our stories, glitches and all, we weave ourselves into the bigger tapestry of existence, healing within every shared confession and uplifting each other through every curveball life throws our way. You know that feeling when you're sitting at a bar, nursing an overpriced whiskey, and you think, today couldn't possibly get any worse? Well, that was me last Tuesday. I had just wrapped up a job interview for what I thought was my dream position. I'd meticulously prepared for weeks, so naturally, when I bombed the final question, I felt like I'd just thrown my future out the window. As I stared into my glass, feeling sorry for myself, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a Facebook message from Rachel, one of my old coworkers. We hadn't spoken since I left that job, and if I'm being completely honest, I wasn't super eager to hear from her. Rachel had a knack for being overly critical. She'd always found a way to step in when she thought I was screwing up, usually in front of the whole team. A real joy at 9 a.m. on a Monday, right? So, I hesitated before opening the message. Hey, I just saw your post about that interview. I hope you did well. Just in case you need any references, let me know. Sweet, right? But a part of me stiffened. I didn't want her help. I needed to distance myself from the toxicity of that workplace, and Rachel was absolutely a part of it. Fueled by whiskey, I typed out a response that I probably shouldn't have. Thanks, but I'd prefer not to reach out. You and I never quite saw eye to eye at work. I hit send, taken aback by my own boldness. What was I thinking? The warmth in my cheeks reminded me I was still processing rejection from the interview, and maybe I had a little more to drink than I should have. The reply came quicker than I anticipated. What do you mean? I thought we had a good working relationship. It felt like a slap to the face. Good working relationship? Seriously? Something snapped in me. I was just done. I fired back, honestly, I don't like you, Rachel. We didn't have a good relationship, you constantly made me second-guess everything, and frankly, I was relieved when I left. There it was, louder than my own thoughts. After a moment of silence, I realized the bar had gone quiet, and I could feel the eyes from a couple of the patrons on me. Oh great, now I was the spectacle. Rachel didn't retaliate, but her typing dots popped up and disappeared. My stomach twisted. Why had I opened this Pandora's box? Finally, her response was blunt. Wow, I didn't realize I affected you so much. Part of me wanted to take it back, to feign a moment of weakness and resolve it like adults do. But another part wanted to just bask in the clarity of my honesty, even if it terrified me. That night, as I replayed our conversation, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and guilt. Maybe I didn't need to have said it in such a public way, but honestly, I had operated under denial for too long, and now the truth was hanging in the air, an exposed nerve I couldn't ignore. In a moment of vulnerable self-reflection, I decided I needed to accept my feelings, however harsh they were. The overwhelming urge to redact was met with a deep-seated understanding. I had finally set a boundary. Fast forward a week, and I learned Rachel had shared our exchange with the whole office, whether out of petty revenge or as some sort of misguided lesson in accountability. The office chatter spiraled, and I became that girl who told off her coworker. It wasn't exactly the outcome I envisioned, but it did bring some clarity. I realized a significant part of my discomfort in the workplace wasn't just Rachel's critiques, but how I allowed her voice to overshadow mine. I had a choice now. I could remain silent about the kind of work environment I wanted, or I could advocate for it fiercely. I chose the latter. Ultimately, it became a turning point. Being honest set me free in ways I didn't expect. Sure, I had momentarily alienated myself from a crowd, perhaps dealing that infamous blow of social discomfort, but sometimes, severing ties is what leads to new beginnings. I sat down at my desk that following Monday, and for the first time, I felt lighter, empowered to not just question but also dictate my worth, and honestly, isn't that what we all strive for after walking away from a toxic environment? In its own way, perhaps I had started stirring the pot, and now my own recipe was coming together. Who knew a drunken confrontation could pave the way for something entirely unexpected? I took a deep breath and settled into that newfound empowerment, my fingers dancing over the keyboard as I tackled emails with a clarity I'd lacked before. The awkwardness from Friday's confrontation still buzzed softly in the back of my mind, but surprisingly, it didn't weigh me down. If anything, it emboldened me to navigate my workday with a sharper sense of who I was and what I wanted. The air felt different, as if I'd shaken off dust that had settled too thickly over the months spent tiptoeing around the opinions of others. Still, it wasn't as simple as I had hoped. I glanced up occasionally, my former coworker, Liam, hovering around the break room, bantering with others. There was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. Some friends avoided his gaze while others awkwardly laughed a little too loudly at his jokes. And then there was me, torn between relief and guilt. Yes, I'd said what I had to, but watching him try to fit back into the dynamic with forced smiles tugged at something within me. Was I the one who had thrown the first stone, or had I merely uncovered something that was always rotting beneath the surface? After the day stretched on, I found myself in a meeting where he made a comment that was, quite frankly, absurd. The room contained an array of reactions, nervous giggles, suppressed eye rolls, but I felt it sharper. The urge to call him out again gnawed at my insides, but this time, I held my tongue. The last confrontation had rocked the boat enough. My job wasn't worth the backlash of becoming the office pariah. I decided instead to be the observer, taking mental notes of how people interacted with one another, how toxic conversations shifted like the tides, and recognizing that I was free to swim away from that shoreline. Later, as I was packing up for the day, a nagging thought played in my head. Was my confrontation worth the unraveling it caused? It felt good to speak my truth, but I didn't want to spiral into another black hole of conflict. I let it roll around for the rest of the evening, along with the slower moving hum of my thoughts. I got home and poured myself a glass of wine, sank into my couch, and turned on a show that I knew would soothe my restless brain. Then I picked up my phone and scrolled until I found that subreddit I frequented. As I typed out my experiences, framing it just right to elicit some feedback, I felt a tide of hope. Maybe I wasn't an asshole for wanting respect, but even writing those words out made me realize the complexity of it all. We are social creatures, but we often forget that the cost of fitting in can sometimes be the highest price of all. The next day, I entered the office, buoyed by the feedback I'd already received from various users on Reddit. Many encouraged me to keep being true to myself, while others raised valid points that got me thinking. Maybe with subtlety rather than outright honesty, there could be a middle ground. Just then, I spotted Liam at the far corner of the break room, isolated but not entirely alone. He was talking to Sarah, an old friend of mine from another department. My heart sank slightly. Was this the moment we should talk about what happened? I hesitated, my mind racing. Did I really want to address it like adults? I noticed Sarah laugh at something he said, and with it came a twinge of jealousy I didn't know I had. Suddenly, I craved closure, but I wouldn't allow myself to be the one to initiate it. My ego clashed with my desire for peace, but as I moved to pour a cup of coffee, I caught Liam's eye. He smirked, and something shifted inside me, something dark lifted, and instead of feeling anger, I felt a wave of sympathy wash over me. Maybe he was just navigating his way through this strange office dynamic as I was. I took a sip of my coffee, suddenly deciding that I wouldn't avoid him anymore. Maybe once bitten, twice shy, but I was done living like the awkward chess piece caught between an unyielding game. For better or worse, the echoes of that night still lingered, but instead of defining what I did wrong, they ignited a new curiosity. As I made my way back to my desk, I felt lighter, braced by the possibilities that lay ahead. After all, if I could be strong enough to voice my dislike, then maybe I could also find the courage to create new connections. I smiled softly at the thought, understanding now that growth often springs from the messy and uncomfortable feelings we try to push aside. It was about time for all of us to step up or move aside. As the days passed, I started noticing little shifts around me that reflected my newfound resolve. I interacted with coworkers I had previously ignored, the ones whose small talk seemed trivial in the shadow of my ex-coworkers' drama. Each interaction was a gentle electric charge, awakening a part of me that had long felt dormant. One afternoon, during a lunch break that felt too quiet, I joined a few colleagues who usually sat at a different table. They were discussing a recent movie, laughter punctuating their conversation. Without thinking much, I chimed in with my own take on it, surprised at how easily my words flowed. They welcomed my input as if I had always belonged there, and with each laugh shared, my confidence grew. I began to realize that I could carve out my space without pretending to be someone I wasn't. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. I still had to navigate the aftermath of that confrontation with my ex-coworker, Julian. Word had spread through the office grapevine. I could almost feel the unspoken questions pulsing in the air whenever I passed by my old teammates. Did you really say that? You called him out? I felt their curiosity like heat against my skin, and sometimes it was unsettling. One morning, I found a message from Julian, through an app we once used to communicate during work. His words were careful and almost businesslike. Can we talk? I'd like to clear the air. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. On one hand, I wanted to dismiss him completely, unwilling to reopen that wound. Still, a part of me felt compelled to understand what he might say. Maybe he was genuinely sorry, or maybe he'd warped the narrative to cast himself as the victim. Deciding to meet felt like a reckless gamble. When I arrived at the cafe, I spotted him at a corner table, his posture almost defensive, hands clasped tightly over his coffee cup. I chose not to sit opposite him and instead settled into the chair next to him, creating a barrier, perhaps as a quiet reminder that this space we had once shared had fundamentally changed. Julian opened with a hesitant compliment about my courage during that night. I wasn't expecting you to say anything, honestly, he said, and I sensed a mixture of surprise and irritation in his tone. People usually just let me walk over them. I couldn't help but scoff, the sound escaping before I could rein it in. You know, you've made a habit of stomping on others to get ahead. Maybe that's why no one stood up to you before. The challenge hung in the air, and our eyes locked, a shared moment of confrontation that felt strangely invigorating. His expression shifted, caught between irritation and a hint of self-awareness. I didn't realize I was coming off like that, he said slowly, as if genuinely processing my words. We continued to talk, the tension ebbing and flowing, dissecting the past while carefully avoiding reliving it. I could still sense the defensive walls he held up, but there were flickers of vulnerability, almost like he was testing the waters to see if I would lash out again. We spoke for nearly an hour, and I found myself, surprisingly, feeling some degree of empathy for him. Here was a person who, despite his shortcomings, was human and complex. We parted ways that day without any grand gestures of reconciliation, just a simple nod of recognition that we had laid a few cards on the table. As I walked away, the weight on my chest lifted a little more. In the weeks that followed, I realized how much my decisions had shifted the dynamics of my workplace, taking the first step toward forging a community that felt less about keeping up appearances and more about honest connections. It opened doors to deeper conversations infused with real understanding. I found myself surrounded by allies rather than competitors, and we collaborated on projects with a synergy I had never experienced before. Reflecting on that night now, I can't help but marvel at how a single act of clarity and confrontation, however messy it was, laid the groundwork for a healthier environment. Sometimes we must be uncomfortable to unearth the beauty in our connections. Julian sent an unexpected message weeks later, just a single thumbs up emoji after I presented a project idea we both worked on. I chuckled at how far we'd come, and in that moment, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. There's strength in authenticity, I realized, and I was finally ready to embrace it. I almost quit my job today, and it had nothing to do with the relentless paperwork or the beleaguered patients lined up outside the clinic. I'm a nurse practitioner, and my days usually blur together in an endless cycle of exams and prescriptions, but this day felt different, like the calm before a storm. I was looking forward to my afternoon shift, a solid block of time free from the morning rush, just me, the soothing hum of the fluorescent lights, and the comforting scent of antiseptic lingering in the air. That's when Lily walked in. She was around my age, maybe a bit younger, and her vibrant green hair was styled in a chaotic bun that seemed to echo her energy. I'd heard whispers of her around the clinic, the one with the unusual case. For someone who dealt with anxiety and depression, she managed to light up the dreary waiting room with her infectious grin, but it quickly faded when I called her name. There was something haunting lurking in the depths of her eyes, a slight tremor in her hands that didn't match her bright facade. As she settled into the examination room, the atmosphere shifted. I asked the usual questions, how she'd been feeling, any changes in medication, and why she sought help today. Instead of the typical responses, though, she began to tell me about the voices. They were quiet at first, just murmurs that danced at the edge of her hearing. But lately? They'd grown louder, insisting she was being watched by someone rather sinister. My heart sank into my stomach. HIPAA exists for a reason, protecting both patient privacy and our sanity, but as she continued, something tugged on my conscience. She said her family didn't believe her and, much worse, that they had given up on trying to help her. It's as if they'd rather pretend I don't exist at all, she said, her voice trembling. I couldn't fathom the depth of that pain, the isolation. I could see the flicker of desperation in her eyes, the yearning for validation. I tried to reassure her, encouraging her to seek support from professionals who could offer therapy and possibly medication adjustments, but she insisted that wasn't enough. The voices had sharpened their focus, demanding she prove her existence in a way that threatened her well-being. I felt my heart race as her story unfolded, a pit forming deep within me. It was getting harder to maintain my professionalism. I knew I shouldn't share my thoughts, my personal experiences as a fellow human who'd felt unseen at times, but a voice in my mind urged me to try. Sometimes, the pressure of feeling invisible can become unbearable, I admitted, keeping my tone steady. But it's crucial to reach out to those who care for you. She hesitated, her expression riddled with conflicted emotions. But what if I don't matter to anyone? She whispered. For a moment, I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Many people felt that way at some point, including myself. I wanted to reach across the space between us, to take her hand and reassure her that she mattered. But I couldn't, not without breaching that invisible line that kept patients and healthcare providers apart. I took a deep breath, the weight of the conversation settling heavily on my shoulders. As she left the room, I felt a mix of relief and dread. I was haunted by her words, her pain, and the burdens I couldn't ease for her. It felt wrong not to do more, to walk away and let someone so desperate wander alone into the world, especially with her fragile mental state. That night, I couldn't shake the experience, replaying her words over and over. I couldn't help but reflect on the strength of connection that often eludes us in our professional roles. I wondered if I had neglected that part of my oath, to care as a human as well as a practitioner. Maybe it was my own past experiences intertwined with her pain, but when I clocked in the next day, I resolved to change my approach. I wanted to find ways to connect my patients with support systems that made them feel valid, to foster a space where they could share openly. Perhaps I couldn't reach out in the fullest sense, but I could certainly lead them to resources that would prove that they mattered. As I worked on crafting a new referral brochure for mental wellness services within the clinic that day, I felt a sense of purpose pulsating within me. And in a way, through focusing on Lily's needs, I began healing some fragments of my own past. If nothing else, I hoped she would find a voice she could trust, a lifeline to bridge the gaps left by those who'd turned away. Months passed, and every so often, I would see Lily's name on the schedule. Each encounter felt like a new chapter. On one visit, I was pleased to see she looked better, The shadows under her eyes had lifted slightly, replaced by a flicker of hope in her voice. "You were right," she said, smiling as she unfolded the complexities of her therapy sessions and newfound support group. "I found my voice. And it turns out, I do matter." In that moment, a warmth spread through my chest, a confirmation that sometimes the smallest acts of reaching out can ignite a change profound enough to alter lives. Lily didn't have to bear her burdens alone anymore, and neither did I. I realized then that being a caregiver wasn't just about the prescriptions or the examinations. Sometimes, it was about sharing pieces of ourselves to help others stitch together their narratives, reminding them that they are not invisible nor expendable. In sharing our stories, we learn to redefine connections and uplift each other beyond the stigmas that might bind us. As I took in these thoughts, I glanced over at Lily, her apprehensive expression softening as she leaned back in the chair, visibly more at ease. The sterile white walls of my office, which usually echoed with the coldness of clinical detachment, seemed to blossom with warmth. There was something powerful unfolding between us, a shared vulnerability that felt like the roots of a plant intertwining beneath the surface, hidden yet vital. Somehow, this realization shifted something within me as well. I was no longer just a healthcare provider, I was both a listener and a participant in an unfolding human experience. However, the day grew darker as I remembered the nagging fears that had haunted me since I became a therapist. My mind wandered back to the unwritten rules of my profession. The protocols of HIPAA, with their stringent regulations, often loomed in the background like a shadow, reminding me that I must tread carefully lest I lose not only my career but also the trust of my patients. What if I stepped over a line with Lily? What if sharing even the slightest piece of my life led to a breach of confidentiality? I was supposed to be the one providing support, not dragging us both into murky waters where boundaries blurred. The anxiety gnawed at me, threading a mixture of elation and trepidation through my chest. To prevent the encroaching worries from spiraling, I redirected the conversation, asking her about her own experiences. A flicker of hesitation crossed her face before she divulged her first encounters with therapy. As she recounted her journey through various milestones, each wrought with its own struggles and victories, a sense of connection deepened. There was an innate comfort in the way our conversation flowed, a gentle give and take that felt as gratifying as it was cathartic. Every shared word knitted our beings closer together, yet in my quieter moments, the toll of my own thoughts lingered like a muted refrain in the background. As the session drew to a close, we exchanged pleasantries, but I sensed an unspoken bond tethered between us, stronger than the unyielding protocols of my profession. Lily had opened up in ways I never anticipated, allowing me to glimpse glorious vulnerabilities within her that reminded me of my own struggles, overwhelming at times, but profoundly human. I made a silent vow to find a way to navigate this connection without falling prey to my own fears. Perhaps, I thought, I could share selectively, using my own experiences to guide but remaining steadfast on the path of professionalism. In the following days, I immersed myself in my work, the rhythm of routine comforting yet occasionally disquieting. Yet, I couldn't shake the memory of that session with Lily. I found myself replaying our conversation over and over, marveling at how two souls braving their respective storms could find solace in shared vulnerabilities. With each passing moment, my initial fears surrounding that session diminished. I felt a resolve taking root. I wanted to work on my boundaries while still holding space for the humanity both Lily and I had uncovered. Finally, I decided that the best way to navigate this delicate situation was not in isolation but together. During our next session, I broached the topic with Lily, underlining the importance of our boundaries yet sharing that vulnerability had proven transformative for both of us. To my relief, she assured me she felt the same sense of community, the relief of companionship. Together, we forged a pact, to be honest about our boundaries while allowing our connections to flourish. The resolution felt simplistic yet significant. It was an unspoken agreement to uphold the integrity of our therapeutic space while celebrating the truth of our shared humanity. With each session that followed, I felt lighter, an odd sense of liberation tethered to my heart. Lily continued to open up in ways that astonished me, and I found myself drawn to her courage, the way she navigated her challenges with such simmering hope. The fear of HIPAA violations dulled in the face of the profound benefits of our connection. It became part of the backdrop of my practice, where I learned to delicately balance my role while still being present, authentic, and, most importantly, human. Reflecting now on that initial trepidation, I feel a newfound appreciation for the journey we've embarked upon, the uncharted waters of vulnerability and the cozy warmth that rises when care meets courage. Amidst the ethical intricacies of my profession, I've found that the essence of caregiving flourishes in honesty, resilience, and shared stories, cementing a beautiful, imperishable bond stretched across what once felt like walls of clinic and distance. After some time, I received a message from Lily. It was brief yet packed with gratitude, a simple, "thank you," expressing how our sessions felt less like a bandage on wounds but rather a seasoned balm for her spirit. I smiled as I read it, my heart lifting again at the thought that we both had navigated this path together, reminding me that sometimes, in the delicate dance of healing, the lines can blur in the most beautiful ways. Life was about bridging gaps, and our bond, though formed in a therapeutic context, had transformed into a cherished connection that I never could have forged alone. And so I realized, in the unpredictable landscape of being a caregiver, it is the humanity we share, the light and shadows, that helps us grow. As I reflected on that turning point between us, I found myself sitting in my small office, a cozy nook piled high with medical textbooks and framed reminders of why I chose this path in the first place. The walls, painted a calming shade of blue, felt more comforting than sterile as they witnessed the evolution of our relationship, a relationship I had once thought was strictly professional now unfolding into something rich and redemptive. I recalled the countless hours I spent with Lily, sifting through her complexities and the layers of stories she carried like old baggage. Each session had been a dance of vulnerability, her heart laid bare against the backdrop of my clinical paperwork and diagnostic goals. I had come to realize that through her own depths of despair, a flicker of resilience shone, and in turn, she was illuminating the way for me, a reminder of the intrinsic connection that binds us all as we navigate our personal labyrinths. But with joy comes uncertainty, and as thrilled as I was to forge this bond, I knew I had to tread carefully. There were boundaries to consider, ethics to uphold, particularly with someone whose path had been riddled with trauma and heartache. I pondered the intricacies of our conversations and wondered how I could continue to support her while avoiding the slippery slope of overreach. Amidst my thoughts, the reality was the challenging nature of navigating a caregiver's role, enhancing lives and offering insights without overstepping that invisible line, one that could easily blur. Soon, our next session arrived, a Wednesday that marked a full month since she had first come to see me. I prepared with mixed emotions, excitement stitched with the shadows of apprehension. As I entered the room, a familiar sight warmed my heart. Lily was already seated, her hands twirling a small silver locket, a talisman of sorts that had clearly become her anchor. "I've been thinking about what you said last time," she began, her voice steady, yet with a softness that carried an underlying vulnerability. "About sharing pieces of ourselves." Her words unfurled like blossoms in spring. Our conversation deepened and broadened in ways that felt profound yet so natural. She spoke of benevolent ghosts from her past, former friends who had fallen away, consumed by their own battles, and how their absence left scars she sometimes could not articulate. I listened intently, leaning forward, as time seemed to slip away like sand through fingers. What followed was a gentle volley of stories, her laughter sparking light moments, while the shadows of sorrow lurked just behind the edges, grounding her narrative. A part of me knew that I had to reveal a bit of my own past, a thread of vulnerability to encourage her narrative to grow. I shared tales of my early days in this field, moments of crippling self-doubt when my idealism collided with the stark realities of human pain. I spoke of patients whose stories had etched themselves into the tapestry of my soul, shaping my resolve and orientation. A fierce yet fragile connection blossomed in that exchange, making our struggles feel lighter, almost woven into each other's fabric of experience in a way that transcended clinical boundaries. As weeks drifted on, I felt us move through those uncharted waters, each session filled with dimensions that I had long ago yearned for in this profession, a partnership of healing in its purest form. I was filled with hope, camaraderie, and yet, a tinge of fear. It was the fear of losing her to the world's cruel indifference or the possibility of outing her vulnerabilities to another who would not understand. The emotional weight was palpable, but we thrived in our candid spaces, lifting each other. Sometimes I found it a bit too exhilarating and overwhelming, yet necessary. Then one day, it happened. Lily mentioned her desire to take a step further, exploring creative outlets to channel her feelings. She spoke of wanting to write a blog, to immortalize her battles and stir others who might feel lost. My heart raced, not out of fear, but sheer exhilaration at the thought of her blossoming beyond the confines of our sessions. Yet, the notion struck a dual chord. What if revealing those thoughts to the world puts you at risk? I hesitated. But she countered with a quiet steeliness that took me aback. It's my story, and I deserve to tell it how I want. And she paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. It was a moment that whispered volumes, and I felt our roles reverse in that heartbeat. I began to see her not just as a patient in need of care, but as a beacon of strength, reaffirming that healing was a shared journey, bringing us back, full circle, to where we started, the necessity of weaving our lives together into something magnificent. With that revelation, I let go of my fears, recognizing that sometimes a pathway to healing lay in the raw honesty of our experiences. I embarked on encouraging her, offering my support and guidance while she traversed this new creative venture. As she crafted her first post, I felt a rush of gratitude. By helping her navigate the uncharted waters of sharing, I was also embracing my fears and reaffirming my purpose. In that light, I learned and grew right alongside her. And suddenly, the once stern lines of caregiver and patient blurred in the most beautiful, validating way. As days turned to weeks, I watched her transform into a confident storyteller, her words wrapping around other seekers of solace as if crafting a communal blanket in which they could huddle. The small canvas of our original therapeutic room became a vibrant tapestry stitched with lifelike colors reflecting joy and sorrow, laughter and tears. It drew others in, creating bonds of understanding and shared struggles. One day, while uploading her latest blog post, she reached out to me with dazzling excitement. A 2-minute read turned into an avalanche of uplifting responses. It was then that I began to fully grasp the magnitude of our connection. I felt closer to Lily than I had to anyone in a long time, and as the lines of our roles shifted, I found comfort in the dance we had created together. Then, as the seasons changed, so did our meetings. We held space together, celebrated milestones, and cried over setbacks, all part of a story that was still unfolding. Each session became a symphony of shared moments, navigating the unpredictable landscape together, replete with laughter, tears, and the beauty of newfound openness. With each step, I grew more certain in my belief that this journey was reciprocal. We were learners, healers, companions, and in the end, we were simply two souls forging ahead, one day at a time. As I look back on that journey, I remember it as a paradox, a blend of vulnerability wrapped in strength. I thought I would make Lily stronger, but in turn, she helped me reclaim parts of myself that I had buried under the weight of duty and expectation. In embracing her fragility while celebrating her resolve, I became entwined in the very essence of caregiving, a shared spirit where the act of healing became about all of us, far beyond the mere confines of an office. I never once regretted that I hadn't quit. Instead, I found a path not only for her but for myself, and this, I realized, was precisely what I was meant to do. Update: it's been 6 months since I last wrote this account, and I felt compelled to share a final chapter. Lily's blog had taken off. She was invited onto a platform to speak about her experiences, and through it all, her voice, our voice, has become a beacon for others struggling in shadows. Last week, we hosted a community gathering, bringing people together to share their stories face to face in a celebration of resilience. Something magical happened. In seeing the way our paths converged with others, I realized I wasn't just a caregiver, I was a part of something much larger than myself. We weren't alone anymore, and in stepping away from the boundaries I once feared, I learned that being human means opening ourselves up to the tapestry of lives we weave together, brightened by the stories we share. Confession: I did something terrible this past couple of weeks. It all started when I received a call from an old friend, Derek, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, and his voice felt like a distant echo of a happier time. We had been inseparable during our university days in an art program, dreaming of gallery shows and creative lives, but life had taken us down different paths. Derek moved to a bustling city to chase fame, while I settled back in our quiet hometown, working an unfulfilling job that barely allowed me to keep my modest apartment. When he called, it continued as a casual catch-up, where laughter mingled with nostalgia, but subtly there was something beneath his jovial tone, a weight. He was discouraged by how his art career was stagnating. He talked about unsuccessful exhibitions and a lack of inspiration, and with every word, a gnawing guilt unfurled inside me. You see, Derek was always the talented one, bold and expressive, while I lingered in his shadow, quietly scribbling away, sharing my works only with a select few, too afraid of criticism. He ended the call with an invitation. Come visit, he said, I need a fresh pair of eyes, a friend who believes in me. The excitement swallowed me whole, but along with that excitement was a pit of dread as I began to think about the situation more closely. When I arrived at his downtown loft, filled with canvases and clutter, I felt a strange cocktail of admiration and envy pulsing through my veins. He seemed so alive, but that spark of creativity I once knew looked like it was flickering out, and as I sat in his studio, watching him paint half-hearted strokes, I couldn't shake this voice in my head whispering that he might need a push. After a few days of playful banter and wine, I sat down with him one evening, the dim lights casting our shadows against the walls, and I revealed a secret I had kept for far too long. I had a collection of sketches and paintings that I knew could get him noticed, and for a fleeting moment, I believed I was doing the right thing. I borrowed pieces from my own portfolio and claimed them as unfinished works of his for one of the biggest local art events happening in a few weeks. My heart raced at the thought of heaving some semblance of success into his life, even if it was tangled in deception. Derek, eager yet oblivious, embraced the idea, turning the wheels of our old dreams as I created an email to submit the work while waiting through sleepless nights of nervous anticipation. The day of the exhibition arrived, and we stood shoulder to shoulder, our bones vibrating with excitement. The crowd was a blur, a tapestry of strangers and art lovers who came to whisper and ponder. My heart sank, melting under the weight of guilt every time someone praised the pieces as Derek's. I could feel his pride swelling with every compliment, yet all I could think about were the artists out there who had poured their souls into their work, unaware that their creativity was becoming a mask for my flaws. As the night progressed, I watched him flourish, drawing attention, and my heart ached as the applause solidified everything I had wrongfully constructed. I should have felt proud, yet each cheer drove a dagger further into my conscience. Did Derek deserve this? And what would happen when the truth unveiled itself? As the exhibition came to a close, the ominous specter of my deceit loomed large. The guilt I had buried began clawing its way to the surface, and I couldn't sleep those nights, my mind plagued with thoughts of what I had done. A week passed, and I knew I had to come clean. I told Derek about my deception in the cold light of dawn, our voices intermingling in a silence that felt heavier than words. He stared at me, shock morphing into a deep hurt, and suddenly I realized I had turned our friendship into a frayed thread hanging onto nothing. In that moment, all the laughter we had shared faded like the morning mist, and I could feel my world crumbling. Now, as I sit in my dimly lit apartment, I can't shake the guilt that has rooted itself into my bones. I wonder constantly if Derek, in all his talent, will find a way to forgive me, or if he will carry this betrayal like a stone in his pocket, a reminder of our broken bond. A part of me wishes I could take it all back, return to that moment when the lies began to weave themselves into our reality, but the truth is already out there, dancing in the ruins of what was once an innocent ambition. Derek hasn't contacted me since, and I doubt he ever will. I can only hope he finds his way back to the canvas, away from shadows of falsehood. So, here I confess, with no one left to share this burden with, an ache in my chest that serves as a reminder of the lines I crossed, and somewhere within, a flicker of hope that maybe next time, instead of reaching for validation, I'll have the courage to invite my friend to truly see me, and perhaps find healing in the genuine expression we both sought. Update: it's been a couple of months since that fateful night. I haven't spoken to Derek, but I recently saw him featured in an article about local artists making waves. He was collaborating with another artist, showcasing work that felt authentically him. I felt a strange mix of pride and heartbreak. He has continued to thrive, and now, I need to step back and allow him to own his narrative. I've begun to paint again, returning to my roots, but this time, I'm doing so with honesty, and although it feels like a small step, it's one towards becoming a better version of myself, one that refuses to tiptoe around the truth. Confession: I did something terrible this past couple of weeks. Looking back, it feels as if a fog has lifted, the air is clearer now, and I can finally see the contours of the mistakes I made. The truth is, though it felt like a suffocating weight for so long, I've begun to embrace the complexity of my emotions, transforming it into a canvas that reflects my journey. After that initial rush of seeing Derek's name splashed across the pages of that article, I made a promise to myself, not just to paint again, but to paint boldly. The same week, I decided to sign up for a local art class, held in a sun-drenched loft downtown. The teacher was this vibrant woman named Lila, who had an infectious enthusiasm that ignited a spark within me. In that studio, surrounded by misfit artists, college students, retirees, professionals turning dreams into night work, I felt a sense of belonging settle upon me like a warm shawl. Each brushstroke carried the weight of unspoken apologies and unprocessed emotions, and with every sigh of paint meeting canvas, I found fragments of my old self surfacing. However, amidst this catharsis, I couldn't entirely shake my guilt. I struggled with the realization that while I was finally becoming honest about my feelings and expressing them through art, I'd torn down the walls of another person without fully understanding the repercussions. I thought of Derek often, especially when Lila praised the way I bled emotion into my pieces, the raw truth of them echoing in the folds of color and shadow, yet I found no way to convey this internal tug-of-war during our brief, casual chats after class. Then, one evening as the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon and cast the studio in shadows, I picked up my brush to begin a new piece. My mind wandered to the last conversation Derek and I had before everything fell apart. I painted his favorite shade of blue, the deep, oceanic color that always reminded me of calm amidst chaos, and I poured into it everything, the heartbreak, the regret, the fleeting moments of happiness, and the darker, uglier truth of hindsight that I had ignored for too long. It was reckless, really, an emotional dumping ground, but it felt right in a world where I had tried so hard to control the narrative, to silence the chaos instead of embracing it. One night, while working late, I sat back and looked at the completed painting, an abstract representation of our tumultuous past, half void of clarity, half teeming with possibility. I was overwhelmed by the emotion that clung to it like dew, and just then, the unthinkable happened. Lila walked by, glanced at my canvas, and gasped. "This is incredible. You've captured a profound depth here," she said, and I felt both exhilaration and suffocating guilt twist in my stomach. Had I really just bared my soul, albeit unknowingly, to the world? Later, after class, I stayed behind, my heart hammering as I prepared to wrap my painting, intending to submit it for the upcoming showcase. The idea of sharing this piece with others terrified me. What if they saw the remnants of my mistakes, the pieces of Derek strewn across the canvas like lost puzzle pieces? I couldn't ignore the knot of anxiety that settled in my chest. Yet, primarily, I couldn't ignore the truth. This was about me reclaiming my own story. The showcase approached faster than I anticipated, and with it came a supposed peace of mind, knowing I was finally stepping into the light instead of lurking in the shadows. When the night finally arrived, I stood in front of my painting under the dim lights, watching as others lost themselves in its depth. Then, to my sheer astonishment, I saw Derek walk through the door, his face illuminated by surprise as he spotted my work. I was frozen, caught between the fear of his perception and the hope of a reconnection. He walked closer, weaving through the crowd, and when he reached my painting, his eyes widened and spoke without words. They flitted over the colors and shapes, and I saw the moment recognition flooded him. I felt my heart race with a mixture of dread and excitement at the thought of him seeing through the brushstrokes to the person behind it. The world around us shrank, and before I could say anything, he turned to me, vulnerability etched across his features. This is truly beautiful," he said, his voice steady yet soft. In that moment, I caught my breath and felt the weight lift, even if just for a heartbeat. I nodded, my throat tight. "It's everything I couldn't say before." His expression softened even more, sadness pooling in his warm brown eyes. "I didn't want to hurt you. It just happened." For a split second, we were draped in a shared silence, the past swirling between us, intricate and painful, yet oddly comforting in its familiarity. Slowly, cautiously, we began to discuss our journeys over the past few months, how he had channeled his creative energy into collaborations and how I had turned mine into this raw honesty, and as we spoke, I realized the gap that had once felt impossible to bridge was narrowing. There would not be a tidy resolution or a perfectly wrapped ending, but in our open exchange, I could sense the flicker of hope, the possibility of both healing and understanding going forward. Our paths had diverged in ways we hadn't expected, yet there was still a part of us that needed to navigate this newfound honesty together. In the days that followed, we began to reconnect, vulnerable yet cautious, allowing ourselves grace as we rediscovered each other in the light of what we had both created, art crafted from pain and resilience. I think back on that time now with a bittersweet reminiscence, allowing myself the space to feel pride for how far I've come. I still paint, still share, and still embrace the unfolding narrative of my story. I've learned to let the brush speak for me while crafting my own truth under the ever-turning canvas of life, one brushstroke at a time. As the days turned into weeks, my small home studio became my sanctuary, a place where I allowed every emotion to spill forth onto the canvas. The soft hum of my music intertwined with the whispers of distant storms rolling outside, and each time I dipped my brush into the vibrant hues of my thoughts, it felt as if I were shedding the layers of my old self. I began to explore themes of connection and disconnection, joy and sorrow, using colors that embodied the spectrum of human experience. The canvases seemed to breathe with life, and I often found myself lost in the process, the world around me fading away as I immersed myself in this newfound dialogue between heart and hand. One afternoon, while layering a particularly haunting shade of blue, representing the cool depth of longing, I received a text from Derek. It was simple, yet profound. "Would you like to see the gallery showing next weekend? I'd love to hear your thoughts. My heart raced and my hands trembled, both from excitement and the weight of what was about to unfold. I hadn't seen him in person since that split, and while I yearned for connection, I feared where it might lead us. Still, I clicked the response button before my hesitation could echo in my thoughts. I'd love to, Derek. I'm excited to see your work. The exchange felt innocuous, but I knew better. Beneath the surface of those words lay the years of friendship we had shared, the love that remained like a ghost between us, and the unspoken wounds yearning for closure. As the day approached, I busied myself painting, though each stroke felt laced with the nerves bubbling beneath my skin. I imagined what Derek's work would look like, how he would have evolved as an artist, and what stories he would share with his audience. The gallery was vibrant with life, walls decorated with familiar motifs that I remembered from our own collaborations, yet something was notably different. This felt like a powerful shift in both his art and our relationship. When I arrived, I spotted him from across the room, standing tall beside his latest pieces, the space around him a swirl of admirers. I hesitated, feeling like an intruder at a celebration I wasn't sure I belonged in. But then, he turned, and our eyes met. Time seemed to pause for just a heartbeat as we shared a moment of recognition. I could see the vulnerability masked behind his professional demeanor, the same vulnerability we had both learned to navigate through our respective art. I approached slowly, as if stepping onto a canvas for the first time, unsure of the exact colors I might find. Your work is incredible, Derek, I finally said, my voice steady as I gestured toward a piece that captured the tension of an elusive connection. I love how you've portrayed the struggle. His smile was warm, but there was a flicker of something deeper, perhaps surprise, or perhaps relief. Thank you. It means a lot to hear that from you. I've really poured myself into it. After exchanging pleasantries that echoed our careful steps into this newly redefined friendship, we began to walk along the gallery, his commentary painting the air with anecdotes of his experiences. I shared lighter stories of my own artistic journey, how the frame of my paintings had now found a wider scope, filled with the honesty I'd only just begun to embrace. As the evening went on, and glasses clinked with laughter, I felt the familiar warmth of camaraderie blossoming between us, rekindled and infused with this raw sincerity. The night turned surreal, wrapping around us in a comforting blanket of shared histories and dreams yet unshared. But just as I began to feel the old comfort of our connection return, there was a pause, a moment where silence fell, not awkward, but contemplative. He turned to me, eyes searching, and asked, "What was the hardest part for you?" After it all ended, I inhaled deeply, feeling the gravity of his question settle between us. This wasn't just a conversation, this was a reckoning, a step into vulnerability. Honestly? Letting go of the guilt, I confessed, finding the words as they formed in my mind. I painted about it, how it felt to feel like a thief of happiness. It was hard to accept that I was part of the pain. He nodded, understanding, lighting his features. You weren't a thief, you were a person caught in a difficult place. I was too. We both were. His hand brushed against mine, just a slip of connection, but it felt monumental, crackling with potential. I've had to forgive myself for not being strong enough to handle things differently. We can only grow from where we start. In that moment, under the glow of the gallery lights, amid the scent of fresh paint and polished wood, I realized how much I had learned in this journey. The shadows of our past no longer loomed with the same weight, instead, they became part of the intricate patterns of our ongoing story. As we parted that night, having exchanged not just pleasantries but deeper truths, I felt a sense of closure wash over me, perhaps not the end of a chapter, but the beginning of a new one, an evolution of the relationship we thought had faded. And so, as I returned to the studio, my heart felt lighter, ready to embrace whatever was next, understanding that honesty, like art, requires time to fully develop. The brush continued to find its rhythm in my hand as I created not just paintings, but a new narrative, a reflection of comfort, growth, and the unyielding beauty of connection, all witnessed on the canvas of our lives, where every stroke told a story. A few weeks later, I would find myself back at that gallery for another showing, this time not merely an observer but an active participant in a narrative we were crafting together, hand in hand through paint and memories, finding solace in the acknowledgement that every ending births a new beginning. It was a Saturday afternoon when I found myself sitting across from my younger brother, Sam, in our favorite coffee shop, the air filled with the rich aroma of brewing espresso and baked goods that set my nerves on edge more than I cared to admit. I loved Sam, really, he was funny and sweet, but sometimes his quirks, an endearing part of his autism, would test my patience. As he meticulously explained the minutiae of a video game I had no interest in, he kept pausing to correct me whenever I mispronounced a character's name or misunderstood the plot. I could feel the familiar irritation bubbling up, making me wonder if I was the only one who noticed. "You don't have to correct me every single time," I finally blurted out, looking down at my coffee cup as if I were trying to see my own troubled reflection in the dark liquid. The cafe was buzzing around us, but in that moment, it felt like we were in our own world, one where I was both the older sibling and, apparently, the villain. I looked at Sam, his expression shifting from shock to hurt, and immediately wanted to retract my words. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it like that." But he didn't reply, just stared at his half-eaten muffin, as if the crumbs had suddenly become the most interesting thing in the room. I knew I should have just let him share his passion without interruption. After all, this was what made Sam happy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost my temper and crossed a line. My thoughts raced. I was tired, overwhelmed with work and everyday life's pressures, yet here was my brother, excitedly sharing a piece of his world with me. Shouldn't I be more supportive? And yet, this constant need for accuracy felt suffocating at times. The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I became with myself. My silence hung heavy between us until he finally whispered, "I just want to help." In that moment, it hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't merely about a character's name. It was about Sam wanting to connect, to share his knowledge, and my dismissiveness had dimmed that spark. As we left the cafe, I resolved to be more patient, to remember that my brother's corrections didn't stem from a desire to belittle me but from a place of connection, even if it sometimes felt stifling. A couple of weeks later, I found myself texting him random things I was learning from a podcast about his favorite games, asking for his thoughts and deepening our conversations. We still had our moments, sure. I still occasionally winced when he'd launch into a correction I didn't ask for. But each time it happened, I reminded myself why I loved hearing him speak about his passions, and I found my frustrations melting away. I'd like to think I wasn't the asshole in this story after all, but someone learning to navigate this complex bond. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon when it hit me just how much progress we'd made. I was curled up on the couch with a steaming mug of tea, listening to the sound of raindrops tapping against the window, and I had this overwhelming urge to share something exciting I'd learned about an upcoming game release that we'd both been anticipating. Instead of the involuntary dread I usually felt, I picked up my phone, hesitated for just a moment, and texted him. "Hey, I just read they're adding an interdimensional feature to the new game, can you believe it?" Within seconds, my brother's text alert chimed. "Yeah. Interdimensional travel means they could really expand the story. I hope they keep the parallel universe idea in mind." I felt a surge of warmth in my chest, a connection that felt more genuine than any correction he'd ever thrown my way. It was moments like these that reminded me how deep our bond ran, masked beneath layers of quirks and differences. Of course, that didn't mean everything was perfect. Just a week later, I made the seemingly innocent mistake of calling one of the game characters a villain during one of our usual gaming sessions. Almost instantly, he shot back a correction, pointing out that the character's motives were far more complex than my casual label suggested. "You know his backstory is about redemption, right? You can't just label him like that." I felt the familiar sting of irritation creeping back in, but I paused. I was about to reply with a snarky retort when I remembered the conversations we had been sharing, the laughter and insights eclipsing the corrections. Instead, I took a breath and said, "Fair point." I needed that reminder. I sometimes get way too caught up in my impressions. His surprise was palpable even through the screen. "Glad you see it that way. The story is nuanced. Learning and understanding make it even more exciting." He didn't know it, but I was beginning to feel the weight of my previous frustrations lift, replaced with a sense of appreciation for how much more he had to offer. Slowly, I started consciously approaching our conversations with curiosity rather than defensiveness. Sometimes I'd even invite his corrections, framing them as challenges rather than annoyances. It became a game of sorts. What knowledge could he share next? Our hangouts transformed from mere game nights into deep dives where he could geek out about characters, plot points, and storytelling techniques. Yes, I still occasionally winced at the over-explanations or overly detailed corrections, but now, instead of seeing them as bothersome interruptions, I began to find them oddly charming. They were pieces of my brother that shaped him into who he was, a passionate perfectionist with a heart bursting at the seams for his interests. I also discovered that in those moments of explaining, something beautiful happened. We were bonding over the nuances of the narratives we both adored. One Sunday, we decided to take a break from our usual weekend routine to watch a movie marathon based on some of our favorite game franchises. A few hours in, I noticed something magical unfolding. He was animated, speaking excitedly about how he would adapt the stories differently. "You know, if I were to write this, I'd change the ending completely. It's not true to the character's development," he said, eyes bright with enthusiasm. Instead of asking him to dial it back or find a quieter volume, I just smiled and nodded, letting his passion wash over me like an invigorating wave. I chimed in with my own ideas, and before long, we were brainstorming a story of our own, piecing together plot lines and character arcs as if screenwriting was a game in itself. It felt like both of us were learning in that moment, not just about the movies or games we loved, but about each other, who we were as siblings, and how we could evolve. I had to admit, there was something healing about this shift. I've learned that sometimes, it takes a little vulnerability to bring two people closer. Maybe I wasn't just tolerating his corrections anymore. Maybe I was actually embracing his perspective, recognizing that our divergent approaches were a tapestry that made our relationship rich and vibrant. As the rain continued to patter softly against the windows, I luxuriated in the knowledge that we were navigating this complex relationship together. I found myself feeling grateful, hoping that even as my brother poured out corrections, I could do my part to help him see that his voice mattered to me. It may still get complicated sometimes, but I felt that complexity was what made our bond so beautifully unique. And maybe, just maybe, it was this all-encompassing journey through learning and understanding that turned out to be the real win. One quiet afternoon, as I perched on the edge of my bed, fully immersed in the imaginary worlds of my favorite fantasy novel, my phone buzzed insistently. It was him, of course, my brother, the ever-passionate encyclopedia of all things gaming. I felt a tingle of excitement mixed with a hint of anxiety, that familiar nod as I wondered if this text would be another innocent inquiry or a deep dive into one of his meticulous corrections. Did you know that in the lore of Arcadia, the main character actually has a hidden backstory that ties in with the prophecy? I smiled at his enthusiasm, picturing him animatedly pacing around his room while typing. "Yeah, I just learned about that on a podcast," I replied, careful to convey my interest. "That's when he dropped it. I'm glad you like it, but you actually missed a couple of key points. You see." And there it was, that familiar avalanche of information I hadn't asked for, cascading down like an unexpected rain shower. My first instinct was to feel that familiar frustration rising, a heat creeping up my neck. But this time something clicked inside me. Instead of letting that prickly feeling take hold, I chose to breathe, sinking deeper into the moment, feeling the vulnerability behind his enthusiasm. I wasn't just being corrected, I was witnessing his excitement and love for a topic that mattered deeply to him. "Dude, I really appreciate you sharing this with me," I texted back, "and I'm totally here for the details. But I also want to dive into this together, you know? I want to connect over it, not just absorb facts." There was a pause, and for a moment, I worried I might have crossed a line again. But a few moments later, my phone chimed with his reply. "Okay, I can try that. I just get really excited, and I want you to know everything." And in those few exchanged messages, I felt like I was glimpsing a new layer of our relationship, one built on understanding, empathy, and respect. The rain continued to rhythmically tap against the glass, a soothing soundtrack to my thoughts as I contemplated how this new approach could alleviate that tension that sometimes bubbled between us. It felt like stepping into a dance. I was learning the rhythm, realizing I didn't have to lead or follow, just move together. In the weeks that followed, our conversations evolved in unexpected ways. We began sharing our interpretations of his favorite games, parsing through characters and plots, discovering that sharing ideas was just as enriching as correcting each other. One Thursday evening, we settled down for a marathon of an old game, the kind that made us both nostalgic. As I stumbled through levels and faced wily enemies, he grinned at my blunders but hesitated to correct me. Instead, he cheered me on, his encouragement washing over me like a warm breeze. I could feel the shift in our dynamic, like turning a page in a book where the story finally aligns. By the time I slammed that virtual sword into the final boss, we both erupted into cheers, the air thick with camaraderie. It was genuine. It was beautiful. Reflecting on our journey, I realized we were two flawed yet perfectly unique characters navigating this intricate world together, learning to appreciate each other's quirks. Sure, there might be hiccups now and then, maybe some unexpected corrections still would slip through, but now, when they did, I'd remind myself of this growth, this bond that was as rich and vibrant as the stories woven into our favorite games. Looking back, I didn't just learn how to handle those moments of correction. I learned to cherish our conversations, seeing them as threads that connected us in ways I never fully understood before. This journey wasn't just about me, it was about us building and redefining how we communicated. And as I sank into my pillow that night, listening to the pitter-patter of the rain, I felt so much more at peace with the trials of our relationship, grateful to navigate this complex tapestry together, wondering what stories we would continue to weave as we journeyed forward. There was a time when every evening was filled with laughter and warmth. I would return from work to the delightful scent of a home-cooked meal, the soft glow of candlelight, and my partner Riley, who greeted me with a hug that seemed to melt my stress away. For the first few years of our marriage, we relished our shared passion for cooking, often experimenting with new recipes or recreating beloved dishes from our childhoods. I was content, and my jeans fit just right, but as life often does, it tilted on its axis. It wasn't an overnight shift, more like a slowly creeping shadow, but over the span of a year, I found myself caught in a web of unexpected challenges. It began with Riley's demanding promotion at work, which came with longer hours and increased stress. I admired their resolve but found myself lonely in the evenings, eating alone more often than not. I'd started to raid the pantry, the fun of cooking fading as every meal alone felt progressively more like a chore. I justified my choices, telling myself it was just a phase, a temporary solace in the constant churn of responsibility. But then came the unwanted comfort of takeout, when all I wanted was to escape the silence of an empty house. A greasy box of fried rice or a cheesy pizza became the remedy, the only companion in my solitude. Strangely, I believe the more I indulged, the more I'd drown out the loneliness. The evenings that once blossomed into intimate dinners turned into binge-watching sessions filled with sugary snacks, deep into the night. I realized I was gaining weight not just from the food itself but from the emotional layers I layered in each slice of pizza or scoop of ice cream, a way of filling the void in my heart. Watching the numbers climb on the scale was sobering yet surreal, like looking at a stranger in the mirror. And yet, when I tried to confide in Riley, worried that my habits were outside the bounds of what we once shared, the truth felt more fragile than ever. They'd flash a quick smile, a fleeting appreciation for my vulnerability, but I could sense an undercurrent of discomfort in their eyes, as if the weight of my struggle only added to theirs. Our conversations turned less frequent, skirting around the budding tension we were both too scared to address. I was caught in a tug-of-war between wanting to reclaim my health and fearing the laughter would fade into something unrecognizable if I laid bare my reality. The sinking feeling in my stomach grew until one evening Riley returned home, their face crumpled with exhaustion from a long day. I had prepared a lavish dinner in a last-ditch effort to recover our connection, but instead of delight, I saw concern flaring in their hazel eyes. They asked gently but deeply, "Are you okay?" I crumbled before them, admitting how I felt engulfed by the weight of my habits, my loneliness, how I felt like I was disappearing into an identity I never intended to embody. The air shifted as if we both let go of our unspoken fears. There were tears and hard truths, but ultimately, we committed to each other to navigate this twisted path together, seeking joy in preparation and balance. In time, we resurrected our kitchen adventures, discovering new recipes that both invigorated our bodies and revived the lightness in our hearts. Neither of us is exactly where we want to be, but we've learned to be patient with ourselves and each other, holding our stories together without judgment, whispering those bittersweet confessions in the quiet of our home, wrapped in warmth and rediscovered laughter. I want to believe that the weight of this journey, both the loss and the gain, will continue to weave lessons that draw us closer. If you've ever wondered how to love during the struggle, look beyond the numbers, my friend, and perhaps you will find the heart of the matter. Update: a few months have passed since that vulnerable night. Our journey took a turn towards wellness, not only physically, but emotionally as well. The weight on the scale has lessened, but what matters more is the weight of connection we've chosen to carry as a team. Riley and I have started to volunteer at a local food bank together every Saturday morning, finding joy in nourishing others while nurturing our relationship. I've learned that each step away from solitude into partnership creates a new recipe for resilience. There's magic in the connection, often unequaled by anything on a plate. If anything, those greasy takeout meals have evolved into afternoons sharing a picnic in the local park, filled with vibrant salads and hearty laughter that echoed into the sky. On those warm Saturday mornings, as the sun spilled golden light over the bustling activity of the food bank, I would often pause amidst the steady rhythm of packing and distributing meals to truly appreciate the moment. Riley and I would work side by side, our hands moving deftly through the boxes of food, exchanging soft smiles and laughter that seemed to wrap around us like a comforting blanket. It was during these hours of service that I discovered a newfound joy. It wasn't just a weekly chore, but a transformative experience that gradually unraveled the tightly wound complexities of the past. Every grain of rice we separated, every can of beans we packed, felt like a step away from the weight I once carried alone. I could see the glint of determination in Riley's eyes, and it ignited a spark within me. This wasn't just about shedding the physical weight I had accumulated, but rather about lightening the emotional burden that had followed me for so long. In those reflective moments, I recalled those late nights, trapped in the cycle of mindless eating and isolation, where food served as a reluctant companion during my bouts of loneliness. I had never truly grasped how my relationship with food mirrored my relationship with people. Unable and unwilling to connect, I threw myself into self-indulgence. Yet here we were, Riley's hand brushing against mine as we shared stories of childhood memories tied to family dinners, laughter spilling out like the plentiful boxes of food surrounding us. It was a different kind of feast, sharing our vulnerabilities and dreaming of brighter futures over plates filled not just with vibrant salads but with hope and intention. As summer began to paint the park with lush hues of green, we found ourselves more inclined to leave the comfort of our home-cooked meals behind in favor of leisurely afternoons beneath the rustling trees. There was something so liberating about laying down the picnic blanket and unpacking lunch, free of the stress that once accompanied food. We had taken to experimenting with healthy recipes together, and the process itself became an adventure. We would stroll through the local farmer's market, picking out ripe avocados and fresh herbs, savoring the air laced with the aroma of baked bread and blooming flowers. Our shared experiences began to nourish us in ways I hadn't anticipated. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling week of work for both of us, I felt the familiar pang of anxiety creep in. I had stepped on the scale only to find a number I hadn't seen in a long while, and though I had tried to shake it off, the weight of that digit hung in the air, threatening to overshadow the joy I felt with Riley. I found myself retreating inward, worry spiraling like a whirlpool, and I could sense the change. Riley, ever perceptive, noticed my silence during a picnic, my mind racing with comparisons, doubts, and a precarious sense of failure. "Hey," Riley said softly, pulling a cluster of cherry tomatoes from our spread, "what's going on in that head of yours?" The concern in their voice snapped me back like a rubber band against skin. I hesitated, but the gentle nudging of their understanding eyes coaxed the truth out of me. I stepped on the scale. "I don't know how I feel about it," I whispered, the vulnerability stirring a wave of unease in my chest. To my surprise, Riley didn't dismiss my worry. Instead, they shifted closer, inputting warmth and acceptance into a moment where I might have anticipated judgment. "It's okay to feel that way. But remember the journey we're on. It's not about the numbers. We're doing this together." And in that exchange, something shifted. For the first time, I realized that Riley wasn't just my anchor but my partner. There was an intertwining of our struggles and triumphs that made the journey so much richer. As we shared our fears and insecurities beneath the dappled sunlight, I found comfort in the shared humanity of struggles. Facing the truths laid bare, I understood that weight comes not just from the body but from the emotional baggage that clings to us. With every heartfelt conversation, every laugh shared over a simple meal, we were queuing up all those intricate layers of connection that overshadowed the fleeting discomfort of a number on a scale. As autumn approached, we made it a point to continue our tradition. Every weekend, we would dig deeper into treasured recipes, while each meal crafted blossomed with discovery and meaning. I transitioned to viewing food as a source of connection, establishing routines that nurtured not just our bodies, but also the bonds that fortified our hearts. The idea of weight shifted entirely. It morphed into a celebration of resilience, companionship, and perhaps most importantly, the magic of transformation. An update on our story came when Riley surprised me one early Saturday morning with a phone call. "Hey, I've got an idea that could spice things up for our volunteering." Their voice held excitement, and curiosity swirled within me as I listened. "What if we organized a community cook-off at the food bank? We can involve everyone we've met, share recipes, culture, and celebrate food as we have, but on a larger scale, allowing them a chance to share their stories too." A thrill of ideas cascaded within me. Naturally, I threw myself into the project with gusto, helping to plan out details and gather ingredients. So, when the day finally arrived, a sense of pride bloomed within me as I watched the community come together, laughter echoing in the harvested sunlight, stories flowing as flowingly as the various dishes that filled each table. Riley and I exchanged satisfied glances amidst the fray, our hands gripping tightly as we relished this moment that seemed to signify a milestone in our journey, a festival committed to connection, nurtured through the ingredients of love, support, and resilience. I realized the true measure of weight isn't found on a scale, but in the richness of relationships we foster along the way. It's in the laughter that resonates in our memories and the connections that nourish our deepest selves, an intricate tapestry woven together one experience at a time. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over the bustling festival grounds, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the path Riley and I had carved out together. The laughter of children spun joyfully in the air, drifting past the aromatic stalls filled with local produce, arts, and crafts. It was a community united in celebration, where each vendor wore a smile as bright as the colors of their wares. I couldn't help but breathe deeply, taking in the savory scents wafting from the food stalls, barbecue smoke mingling with sweet notes of freshly baked pastries. With every passing moment, I savored not just the comforting flavors that tasted of home, but also the warmth of Riley's hand in mine, our fingers interlaced like the vines wrapping around the nearby oak trees. When we made our way over to a small booth selling homemade jam, the elderly woman behind the counter welcomed us with a twinkling smile. Her hands were calloused yet gentle as she showed us the vibrant labels, each depicting a different fruit imbued with stories of sun-soaked days and summer whispers. "This one's made from the first strawberries of spring," she said, her voice nostalgic as she handed us a small sample. As we tasted the sweet spread, I could see Riley's face light up, and in that moment, I was reminded of how far we had come, how filling our lives with love and connection was beginning to replace the emptiness that once sat heavy in my own heart. After a leisurely stroll through the festival, we settled on a patch of grass beneath a sprawling sycamore tree, its branches offering a comforting canopy. Riley unpacked our homemade picnic, a collection of vibrant salads and hearty sandwiches, all crafted from ingredients we had picked up together at the food bank's community garden. The sun filtered through the leaves, dappled light playing on our faces as we shared bites and stories, laughter spilling between us like an uncontainable river. "You know," Riley began, crossing her legs beneath her, "it's strange to think how food used to connect us in a different way, isn't it? I remember all the late-night takeout and how it was always more about escaping the day than really celebrating anything." I nodded, understanding all too well how those nights were often marked by solitude and the clinking of takeout containers rather than warmth and conversation. "Yeah," I replied softly, "it's almost like we used food to fill the spaces we didn't know how to navigate emotionally." We were both silent for a moment, the hum of festival laughter in the distance grounding us as we processed those feelings. It was liberating to acknowledge our past without letting it define us. Riley reached out and placed her palm on my cheek, bringing my gaze back to her. "But look at us now, creating new memories, giving new meaning to those moments. That's what it's about, right? Learning to nourish ourselves in every sense of the word." Her eyes sparkled with a mixture of hope and determination, emboldening me to step further into this newfound journey with her. With dusk settling in, the festival exploded to life with flickering lights strung across the trees, illuminating the path of laughter and connection all around us. We moved from stall to stall, sharing bites of gourmet grilled cheese and sipping on fresh apple cider as the sky transformed into a canvas of purples and blues. Every moment felt imbued with the lessons we had learned, the importance of of savoring not just food but the quiet magic woven into relationships. And in that bustling atmosphere, it dawned on me just how much I had been missing, how easy it had been to get lost in my own solitude, yet how deeply transformative it was to lay aside old habits and embrace vulnerability. As we leaned against each other on a bench, our bellies full and hearts even fuller, I knew that this was just the beginning. In my heart, I felt a shift, an understanding that life was not just about the meals we shared but also the people who enriched those moments, who brought flavor and vibrancy to the everyday. Our journey together echoed the very essence of a bustling market, a beautiful blend of the familiar and the unexplored, the laughter of a newfound connection taking center stage in our lives. Later, as the sounds of the festival faded and the stars twinkled brightly above, I came to realize that the joy of our partnership would continue to thrive. I turned to Riley, "I can't imagine doing this without you. This feels too right." She smiled, leaning in closer, the warmth of her body providing both comfort and strength as she whispered, "We're in this together, always." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle in, a vow of sorts, echoing the harmony we had woven into our lives through love, resilience, and the steady rhythm of shared moments. The true measure of weight was indeed not confined to a scale, but rather the delightful burden of connection we carried, woven tightly with each experience we chose to embrace.